January 11th, Planning and Zoning Commission together. And before I do roll call, I've been informed by the Fire Marshal that I have to say we've got a new emergency plan, I guess, while there's this renovation going on. So if a fire alarm or an emergency happens, please make your way to the closest exit to you. Just got off the airplane. Please do not use the doors behind you. And said my piece. So we'll call the roll.
Tyler Robinson is excused. Tony Cage.
Present.
Stacy Dean is excused. Gregory Strike is excused. John Spring.
Here.
Brandon Walker.
Present.
Andre Spinelli.
Present.
Brandon Sporheis is excused. Danielle Bailey. Here.
Okay, we have a quorum. Thank you. Any disclosures, Mr. Spring?
I have no disclosures. Thank you.
I have two. The first is that I was not here for the initial, the case 2016-0021, but I did listen to that online, so I should be up to date on that. My second one is regarding G3. I'm not sure if this needs to be a disclosure, but I am currently in the process of buying a place within a half a mile of that lot.
Do you have any financial interest or substantial private interest in the matter before the body, other than the fact that you're buying a lot near
No.
the property? Okay. I don't find that there is a conflict of interest there, but maybe a formal motion, just so it's on record, directing you to participate would be warranted.
I move to direct. What's your last name again? Ms. Bailey to participate.
Do we have a second? Mr. Spring seconds. All those in favor, I guess. Do we use? We can use our machine, I guess.
All right.
Yep. No. But I'll let you work that hearing, and seeing none, Ms. Bailey is directed to participate in that case. Moving on to case 2016-0021, it's a request to reopen, rehear case 2015-0101 based on new evidence or circumstance change or changed circumstances. Do we have a report from the staff?
Mr. Chair, staff can answer procedural questions.
Okay, thank you. And so maybe you can help, because I know it was just a couple of us commissioners discussing this case with you earlier. Since we do have a short board, it will take all 5 of us to vote in the affirmative, assuming we get a motion and a second to reopen this case. Having said that, I'm at the will of the body here. Mr. Spring.
Just a procedural question. When we vote, we need to present findings for this in a resolution. We'll have a resolution.
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, the code actually says, in terms of, I believe this would be in terms of the finding, that upon the filing of a motion under this section, which is new evidence, changed circumstances, and it's under the Code of Regulations, the Commission shall expedite its consideration of the motion and shall determine whether to rehear or reopen the motion. The commission shall reopen the public hearing or rehear the matter previously decided if the commission determines, if true, that the alleged new evidence or changed circumstances would substantially change the decision of the commission, and that the person alleging the new evidence or changed circumstances acted promptly and with diligence in bringing the information to the commission's attention. So I believe that the findings would have to address those two items, that if the commission determines that their decision is substantially changed by the submission of the new evidence, and a finding that the applicant submitting the motion to rehear acted promptly and with diligence in bringing the information forward.
A follow-up, if I may, Mr. Chair. The petitioner identified 4 or 5 different points that we thought were in error or overlooked. Should we address each one of those and discuss those and make a determination on that, or at least make some findings on those points?
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, that would be the discussion points that you would want to address, because that's the substance of their new information, changed circumstances.
Okay, so we would address, we should address point A, B, C, and D as part of our discussion, probably.
Through the chair, yes, Mr. Spring.
Okay. I would make a motion to start the discussion if you
Thank
like.
you, Mr. Spring.
I don't
suggest
have a-
that.
Don't
Mr.
have
Walker,
a-
hold on, Mr. Spring, one second.
Oh, I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Walker was in the queue, but unless do you want to wait until after the
That's fine.
motion was on the floor for discussion, or what did it?
Actually, I think it's probably better if I do it before the motion.
Okay.
So I'm sure that when we put this on the schedule, the applicant was not aware that we were going to be short-boarded tonight. I'm not saying we should or we shouldn't, but can we give them the opportunity to reschedule? Because I could see, I mean, this obviously didn't pass last time. We're missing a few bodies tonight, and I guess I just want to see them, you know, if they need the opportunity to.
Is that question directed to staff, Mr. Chair?
I guess I'm looking at the vice chair here, and then I guess also I'd be interested in getting some feedback from the staff on that too.
Well, it doesn't sound like it, that this can be postponed based on some direction that the staff had received earlier today.
Okay.
But I'll let the staff elaborate on that.
Through the chair, Mr. Walker, I did contact the law department because this is a unique situation. It has not happened very often, and I wanted to make sure that procedurally what questions you folks might ask, the commission might ask, and what the proper answer would be. And I know that under AMC, the Code of Regulations 2110-305 does allow postponements. And it does allow postponements that it states quite clearly that a member of the commission, a member of the public, or anyone appearing before the commission can ask for a postponement of a matter coming forward to the commission. The wording under new evidence, changed circumstances is different, however, and this is what made me wonder what is the procedure, given that the commission regularly does approve postponements like a short board and it requires 5 positive votes to approve an action. And the language under the new evidence, changed circumstances is somewhat different. It says that upon filing of a motion under this section, the commission shall expedite the consideration of the motion. So that wording seemed to be directing the commission to act with all due haste. And I don't know if the will of the commission will be otherwise, but the direction I got from the law department, it seemed like this language was quite specific in terms of scheduling a motion to rehear a case.
Yeah, that works for me. So I feel comfortable trying to hear it tonight, I think.
Mr. Spring.
One more procedural. When discussing these points, is it okay to direct questions to the petitioner?
The advice that I was given by law is that the decision should be based on the information submitted by the petitioner and the response of staff, and that the matter is a decision that rests with the commission. Because the commission, that first question is, it was the commission's decision originally, and that the commission needs to determine whether the new evidence, changed circumstances would have a material impact on how, having received that new information, if it would have a material impact on how the vote would have been if they had had it at the time they were originally making the decision.
I would think, and maybe shed some light for us, I would think if one of the commissioners has a question regarding clarification of what's in the packet, either to staff or to the petitioner or petitioner's representative, would that be okay if it was more clarification on what was submitted, not so much on? Or best
I
not?
think that will have to be a decision of the commission.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I am the petitioner.
Yes, sir.
And what I'd like to do is be able to address staff's denial of the request, because the information they've provided you is inaccurate, and I've proof that it's inaccurate. And for you to review my request to hear the issue and for staff to provide you inaccurate information would not be fair.
Thank you, and I totally understand your concerns, and I think if any one of the commissioners has a point of clarification within the packet, I think we'll just go ahead and allow that clarification either through staff or you or I'm sorry, I forgot your name, sir, but your representative this evening, if that works for everyone. Okay? Gonna make a motion?
Yeah. I move that we reopen / rehear plating and zoning case 2015-0101 based on new evidence or changed circumstance.
And we have a motion and we have a second from Mr. Spring. Mr. Spinelli, do you care to speak to your motion?
I'd just like to get the ball rolling on whether or not we're going to change our mind on this case or not.
Thank you. I think it best be prudent to go through points A through D. And Mr. Spring, I'm sure you've got something as you were in the queue earlier.
Yes, sure. If you want, I can read the points and the staff response and I'll give you my opinion about each one, and I'm sure everybody else will too, if that's okay.
I think that will kick us off nicely, and then we can get the ball rolling here.
And if there's something to ask the petitioner, we can do that during this. Okay. So point A, as summarized in the staff report, the petitioner claims that the staff failed to provide an accurate, complete, or unbiased review of the law and the facts pertaining to the rezone application of the property. And staff respond. Also the staff misinterpreted Spenard Commercial District Development Strategy by inferring that only those lots identified transition could be considered for rezoning, when in fact the plan states that on page D1 that the transition area outline may be exceeded in some cases if individual circumstances warrant it and other conditions to limit impacts are satisfied. And the third part of that is staff did not correctly interpret and report to the Commission the application of the new Title 21 to the property. Just to get the ball rolling, as Mr. Spinelli said, it wasn't my understanding that there was any restrictions based on the Spenard Commercial Development Strategy. I understood that even though it wasn't within that boundary, that if circumstances and warranted it, we could recommend a rezone. Just because it was outside that boundary, in my opinion, I fully understood that was within our purview to do that, and I don't think, that certainly wasn't my understanding. So I don't think there's a misinterpretation of the Spenard Commercial Development Strategy whatsoever.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. Anything else on point A?
The only thing is, I guess for a point of order, I thought we were reopening the hearing, and I guess at that point that we would hear from the petitioner.
This request lies with this body in order to rehear at some point in the future. So the petitioner is requesting a reopening, and so we've got to vote on whether we reopen it at some point in the future or not.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. Do you want to continue?
Okay, point B. The Planning Commission did not have the opportunity to fully review and consider the impact of aircraft noise on the property. Staff ignored the issue of the impact of airport noise. The memorandum from the Alaska Department of Transportation stated that the property was within the 60 decibel noise contour as determined by the Anchorage International Airport official noise studies. I guess I don't understand that question, because the reserving the opportunity is not the same as reserving housing. That's what I think the argument was. I guess I don't buy that argument. I mean, there's still an opportunity to redevelop the property. It doesn't have to necessarily be commercial. It could be residential. So I'm not sure how this applies to this case. It doesn't mean that you have to, just because it's in the noise contour, it doesn't mean you have to rezone everything in the noise contour as commercial. That would be a little bit absurd, I think, to do that. So it's just, we have the authority, I think, as a commission to make a determination on a case-by-case basis. And generally, in my experience, we've really never really considered the noise contour when we've made recommendations on rezonings. And we've done many of them in this area along Spenard, so I'm not sure this is a real critical factor in my opinion.
And just for the record, I'm going to echo that comment. That I never, to vote this at the time up or down, a noise, aircraft noise on the property never even came up, and I never even considered it. So I agree that this point probably is somewhat moot, but I don't want that won't impact my decision one way or another on this case. I just don't think that in this case, point B, had we had that information before or brought to us now, I don't think it would have impacted my vote one way or another.
I can continue with point C. This is a rather lengthy one. Maybe I'll summarize part of it. The Commission did not have the opportunity to fully review or consider the import of the Spenard Road technical report applied to the property. As staff said, they didn't really consider the reference to Spenard corridor technical report, but the technical report is just a backup to the actual strategy report. It isn't adopted as a part of it. Everything that's adopted, all the guidelines are contained in the actual Spenard corridor strategy report. The information that the petitioner alludes to in the technical report is basically an analysis of developability of properties. So, yeah, there's some properties that are, including the property the petitioner was asking for a rezone, that could be redeveloped. It was determined, based on their criteria, based on the property value versus the land value, that it was redevelopable. It doesn't mean that it's automatically should be rezoned. It's just information provided as background to the report, and I don't think it's, tells us that anything about whether or not we should rezone the property. Part D, then, point D, the Commission did not have the opportunity to review a detailed development plan for the property. Well, that is because there was no development plan presented as part of the application, and there's ample opportunity to do so, and failure to do so doesn't mean that we need to rehear it. That'll be another bite at the apple, I think, and I don't think it would set a good precedent for the Commission to be considering those things.
I'd just like to add for the record, this point D was one that I felt strongly on when we first heard this case, and I thought to myself, during the case and after, if I had something more substantial to look at, that might have played into a little bit more of my decision at the time to vote the case up or down. It wasn't all that I had thought about for merits of the case, but it was an important point, so I'm glad the petitioner pointed this out. However, I have to agree with you that there was, plenty of time. We have approved cases in the past without seeing a development plan, and I made that very clear when I heard the case of those very points. Anyway, I just wanted to put that on record. So it sounds like we've gone through these cases, or these points, I'm sorry, and so at this point, again, being a short board, I'm empathetic towards the petitioner. We'll take any more discussion. Mr. Walker, it looks like you're in the queue.
This question, I suppose, is for staff and then potentially for the applicant if you don't have the right or good answer for this. Is there a development plan that was not provided that has since been provided by the applicant?
Through the chair, on page 21, there is a schematic, a plan that was submitted for parcel 1, parcel B, and parcel C. And then there's a proposed building shown on a parcel that fronts onto Spenard Road. That parcel was not included in the petition to rezone because it already was Zone B3. Parcel 1 was recommended for approval to rezone it to B3. The parcels B and C were the parcels that were not recommended for approval to B3. And that schematic is shown on page 21 of the packet of tonight. It's called Exhibit B Schematic Site Plan, Spenard and Valleywood, and it's dated December 20th, 2015.
I see it. So if I can follow on that, just I guess a discussion amongst ourselves here. I think the issue at hand here is whether or not we're opening this case again, and whether or not there are enough reasons to open the case. I think I voted in favor of this rezone to begin with, so I find myself leaning on that side of the fence already. I'm not sure that I see a lot of evidence here to reopen the case necessarily, although my personal opinion is still favoring this rezone. Is there any way we can hear from the applicant? I guess I'd like to hear in their words if there's something we're not reading here, or if there's an angle that we're missing.
I think if it's something that's, if you want to clarify something in here, I think
Okay.
we'll allow that, but just to kind of blanket it with, are we missing something? I think that opens us up to, something that we may have to deal with down the road at some point.
No, I understand. We don't want to open public
Just looking-
testimony
Yeah, I'm just
all
trying to
over
get,
again
yeah,
here.
procedurally,
Yeah.
I'm trying to get, to do
Mr.
this
Chair?
the right way.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
a question could be posed to the applicant.
Okay.
Right,
Mr.
right.
Walker, go ahead.
Well, the most valid thing I guess I see here is if in fact the applicant intended for this to be considered under the new Title 21 versus the old, and if their expectations weren't clearly communicated, I mean, I guess that seems like a pretty big oversight in my mind. I don't see anything here telling us what the difference would be. So, Mr. Agnew, can you, there's definitely some of these things that I don't think we can consider. And like the noise, I mean, frankly, as I wasn't considering the noise when we made the decision, I think I voted for it anyways, but, I think everyone here has agreed that those that did vote no weren't considering the noise at the time, so that's probably not a valid reason for us to open the case again. But can you elaborate, for example, say on how the effect of being considered under the new old Title 21 as opposed to the new Title 21, how that negatively impacted the case?
And prior to that, can you just spell your name for the record?
Steve Agni, last name spelled A-G-N-I, appearing on behalf of petitioner Rick Richter, Chairman Kange, Commissioner Walker. The most important thing we have to understand, and there is some confusion on the application of the new Title 21, the old Title 21. When the petitioner, and in this case I sign on behalf of the petitioner, we are agreeing to the process and procedures that apply to the case and the standards that will be applied in the rezone review and implementation. Those standards are set out in the old 21.20090. Those standards talk about conformance to the comprehensive plan and the impacts on the neighborhood. Nowhere in the standards is there any discussion of detailed plans, detailed identification of use. Now, over time, as a practice, I think most practitioners in this commission have looked to more detail on usage, but the old Title 21 is silent on enumerating usage. What the plan, or excuse me, the statute does say is how will this zoning district conform to the comprehensive plan and all of the elements of the comprehensive plan. And those include, for example, things like noise, the Spenard Road Technical Report, and what we felt was we had the whole table tilted against us at the beginning because, frankly, you know, a lot of these things are new in the transition between the old Title 21 and the new Title 21, but we were not obliged under the old Title 21 to identify usage. Now, as of January 1st of this year, this property, all property in the municipality, will be under the requirements of the new Title 21. You rezone this property, we're not grandfathered into the old Title 21. It is the requirements of the new Title 21 that shall apply. And that's really important because under the new Title 21, there's still the opportunity to do mixed-use development that includes residential. That's an important distinction you all should keep in mind that, frankly, I don't believe staff, well, I think they just misconstrued the whole application of the new and old code to the case. So, in short, the new code will apply to any usage, any building permit application in the future, and that would include potential residential mixed-use development. I appreciate the opportunity to answer the question and would only request as a courtesy to allow Mr. Richter to make a couple more comments to share with you. Pardon me. Did you have any more questions?
Well, we've got one more person in the queue unless Mr. Walker had something else.
Well, so my only question, I guess, is I see this drawing on page 21 of our packet. It just says proposed building. Is there an elevation or a set of floor plans that outline that this is a mixed-use structure? Or, I mean, is there a more specific plan that explains what type of uses would be in the building?
This plan was prepared by a potential purchaser of the property, and we did not have ownership of the work product at the time that the application was submitted. If you were to vote to rehear this matter, then certainly we could provide additional information, including elevations, detailed code study. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Spinelli.
My question is the petitioner's properties are currently slated to be partially rezoned into one zoning and some of it stay in the old zoning. So if he was to try and develop those properties together, would he be required to put buffer landscapings through the middle of, like, say, what's the parking lot on the proposed drawing? Or?
Well, the short answer is yes. Between residential and any commercial, you would have to put a buffer landscaping. But the labeled lots B and C to the right of the drawing cannot be built out and developed as off-site parking for the lawful commercial use on the adjacent property. That's one of the main reasons we're here. There's nothing under the existing standards that allow for residential property to be developed as parking that would support a lawful commercial use on an adjoining property. This land use pattern that you see here with the parking to the rear is exactly what has been implemented across the street that on the property that some folks have called the budget rent-a-car building. Now it's enterprise rent-a-car, but it's the same development pattern that's across the street. And that was a rezone implemented pursuant to the Spenard Road Commercial District, and that was in the mid-90s. And as my packet showed, there's another 13 of those.
I'm going to ask this question. Oh, sorry, I should have gotten in the queue. Is anybody else in?
Go ahead, Mr.
So this might be for you, Steve, and it might be for the staff. What if B and C were zoned RO? Could they be used as accessory parking?
I don't have the table in front of me. I have an excerpt of the new land use table that included the qualification of residential within B3. I don't know if RO would allow for it. I don't have the text in front of me.
Mr. Chair, one thing I would like to clarify. I would like to clarify a point. This case was brought in under the old code. If the commission decides to rehear this case, it will continue to be under the old code. It will be developed under the old code. It will not have the new Title 21 requirements applied to this property.
That's true.
There is, on page 23, there is a Title 21 code selection. In that, the applicant chose the old code. Above the signature, it says, I understand that my application will be reviewed and acted on using the provisions of the code version I have selected, and this selection is final. So the selection of the old code will go along with this property through to the end of the development of this property. It will not switch over to the new Title 21 because we are in 2016. So I did not misapply not reviewing this case under Title 21 because the applicant chose the old code.
Yep, thank you. And that was to my point. And when we heard this last time, in fact, I was just rereading the minutes, and that's why I said, you know, if erring on the side of caution and allowing the applicant to come back sometime in the future, and I'll leave it at that. Mr. Spinelli's in the queue, and then we'll move forward.
If I may be able to address that point, that would allow any applicant to grandfather their property into the old code by merely submitting an application. That makes no sense. It's the standards and the procedures under the old code.
Because I was going to ask staff some questions that would kind of allude to that.
Pardon me, sir?
I just wanted to ask staff a couple questions about this.
Okay.
So you, through the chair, you mentioned that this property would be developed under the old code, but so what we have before us is the opportunity to rehear a rezone, which that would change the zoning. It's kind of my understanding of the way building permits work in this town is that the next thing they would do is they would apply for a building permit or a fill and grade permit or any other sort of permit to actually do development work on this property. And when they apply for that, which code would apply to that permit?
The design criteria manual would be applied to the development of fill and grade and construction. Those are the building codes. The development of the property in terms of setbacks, landscaping, building height will continue to be under the old code, the old zoning code. The new Title 21 zoning code would not apply to this property because it was submitted and approved or acted upon under the old code, which was chosen by the applicant. That's why we had the form that people would either choose the new code or the old code. And once they made their choice, you can't mix and match and take portions of one code and portions of the other code. It's either or.
And I think
That's
just as
awesome.
a point of order,
Made my day.
we're kind of veering off of these points, and I see no one else in the queue. We have a motion to rehear the case. We have a second. Please use your machines to vote. And that motion does not pass. Moving on to the consent agenda. We have several items, 4 on the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to, would anybody like to pull anything from consent agenda? And I would entertain a motion. Mr. Spring, I have a motion on the floor to approve the consent agenda, second by Mr. Walker. Please use your machines to vote.
My machine's not working, and it wasn't.
I noticed that.
Okay.
Are you,
Did you log in okay?
are you voting in favor of the consent agenda, I'm assuming? Yes. So the consent agenda. Can we make that record on reflect no for Ms. Bailey on the prior case? Mine didn't show her as voting. So the consent agenda passes. As we get into, I will open the public hearing part of this case. Before I read the procedure by which the public may speak to the commission at this meeting, we have several cases, but I would like to point out that we have a short board at this point. There are 5 members here. To approve any of the cases before us takes all 5 of the commissioners to vote. So you've kind of got a one-time pass here. If you would like to reschedule at the next earliest date, there'll be no charge to the petitioner to postpone its cases. And so, again, instead of reading this whole thing, I'm going to go down this list, and maybe the petitioner or petitioner representative can come up and see if they'd like to hear the case or at least give me a verbal. So in 2016-001, the petitioner is CFT NV Developments, LLC. Is the petitioner or petitioner representative here this evening?
We'd like to proceed with 001 and...
Okay. Case 2016-0007, Community Development Department. Is the petitioner here this evening? Would you like to proceed? Yes. Okay. And 2016-0014, proceed with that one as well?
We'll be going forward.
I'm sorry, the Municipality of Anchorage Planning Department, 2016-0014, you're going to move forward? Thank you. Procedure by which the public may speak to the Commission at its meeting is, after the staff presentation is completed on public hearing items, the Chair will ask for public testimony on the issue. Persons who wish to testify will follow the time limits established in the Commission Rules of Procedure. Petitioners, including all of his or her representatives, have 10 minutes, and part of that time may be reserved for rebuttal. Representatives of groups, being community councils, PTAs, etc., will have 5 minutes. Individuals will have 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the Commission. You may only testify once on any issue unless you are questioned by the Commission. An individual may have appeal rights relating to an action the Planning and Zoning Commission takes, except Commission recommendations to the Assembly, which are not appealable. Appeals must be filed with the Clerk's Office within 20 days after approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission of the resolution, which is the Commission's final decision. A fee for the appeal is required at the time of filing. Moving forward, case 2016-001, request to rezone from RO to District B3. District, may we have staff's presentation?
Mr. Chair?
please? Yes.
Could I make a point of order?
Yes, please, help me.
Is it possible to combine cases 1 and 2 in our public hearing? They're actually the same issue, obviously.
I don't see a problem with that. Staff, I'm seeing no objection. Okay, thank you. May we have the petitioner's representative come up, and staff would be happy to have your report in those 2 cases.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the case of the rezone from RO to B3, this is a request to rezone a almost 1 acre parcel from RO to B3, residential office to general business district. The property is located south of West Northern Lights, west of Minnesota Drive and east of Lois Drive, and north of West Benson Boulevard. This property is located in a town center identified on the Anchorage 2020 land use policy map. Anchorage 2020 defines town centers as the focus of community activity for smaller sub-areas of Anchorage that include a mix of retail, shopping, and services. The property to the east and south is zoned B3. Our RO zone property to the west is developed with low-rise office buildings. R3 property to the south across Benson Boulevard is developed with condominiums. The rezone meets policy number 5 as it is compatible in scale with adjacent uses, and policy 24 of the Anchorage 2020 as it generally meets the characteristics of a town center. The West Anchorage land use goal is to guide land use to accommodate project growth, protect existing neighborhoods, appropriately site multifamily development, reduce airport-related conflicts, support businesses and economic development, and preserve wildlife habitat. An objective is to designate commercial land uses that support the continued viability of small local businesses while also attracting new commercial ventures at appropriate locations. The restaurant and retail uses are appropriate to an area that is designated a town center. The uses are compatible with existing uses in the surrounding areas and would serve adjoining residential uses. The land use patterns surrounding the petition site are well established. The requested rezone to a B3 district is compatible with the surrounding land uses. The petition site abuts B3 zoned land. The site is served by streets constructed to municipal standards. It's served by pedestrian facilities and by public transportation. Storm drain facilities are located in West Northern Lights Boulevard and West Benson Boulevard. Drainage requirements are addressed during review of any required building permit for development of the site. The site is served by all public services and facilities. Development of the site is not expected to have an adverse impact on existing public services and utilities. The intent is to begin construction in the spring of 2016. The site has been undeveloped or vacant for 10 years. With development of the site with commercial and dining uses would have a positive effect on the distribution of land uses, and the site and would have a positive effect, and it would serve the surrounding residential development. The Planning Division does recommend approval of the rezone of the property to B3, the division does recommend deleting the effective clause, which was to plat the property. This lot was originally created by warranty deed, and it is described by meets and bounds. So the original recommendation was to have the rezone effective subject to recording a final plat, and given the construction schedule to begin in spring, getting a preliminary plat approved and getting it recorded with the district recorder's office could have really badly affect the construction schedule to have the development open for business by the end of the construction season. As far as the amendment to the West Anchorage District Plan, this is a request to amend the West Anchorage District Plan. The property is classified as office low intensity on Exhibit 41A, the West Anchorage Land Use Plan, and it also is shown on Exhibit 41C, and that is a detail of the Turnagain-Spenard land use detail. This is a repeat, but it adjoins the west boundary of a town center land use classification. It's undeveloped. It's been vacant for over a decade. The proposal is to develop a small commercial retail and a restaurant. The application is submitted in conformance with the West Anchorage District Plan that states rezoning requests that would create inconsistency with the land use plan map are not allowed without concurrently amending the land use plan map. In this instance, there are two maps that will need to be amended. The adjoining Aurora Village subdivision is Zone B3. Tract 1 is occupied with a gas station, and Tract 2 is the location of the Cars Safeway store. The West Anchorage District Plan is intended to establish a framework for making future development decisions that align with long-range land use recommendations in Anchorage 2020. Each land use designation shown on the land use map is defined. That includes a statement of intent and a description of essential characteristics such as predominant uses. By definition, dining and small retail may occur in the office low-intensity use district as defined by the West Anchorage District Plan. However, this request to rezone was submitted under the old Title 21. Restaurants are permitted only as an accessory use for hotels, motels, or motor lodges having 20 or more rental units in the RO district, which it currently is zoned. A commercial retail use is not permitted in the RO district. Both restaurant and retail uses are permitted in the B3 district, which is intended for general commercial uses in areas exposed to heavy automobile traffic. Therefore, the department recommendation does recommend approval of an amendment to Exhibit 41A, the West Anchorage Land Use Plan, and to Exhibit 41C, the Turnagain-Spenard Land Use Detail, to change the land use classification from office, low intensity, to town center. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Spring has a couple questions, or at least one.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar as you are with platting requirements. What is the code citation that requires that that effective clause regarding the rezoning should become effective and not become effective until a final plat has been recorded?
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, typically when there is parcels created by warranty deed, that is considered, if it's done now, it's considered an illegal subdivision, and it does violate the code as it exists. There has been a platting authority since 1953. That was in territorial days. And so it's basically, it has happened in other places. It's an aliquot part. It's a residual parcel that never was platted. So, harking back to my platting days, my subdivision days, I originally recommended that the parcel be platted so that it was an official plat. But it did happen before there was a City of Anchorage or Municipality of Anchorage. It was created prior to that, and there isn't a requirement by code to force the replat of the property. I just thought it would clean up an aliquot part and create a subdivision.
I understand. Can I follow up on that? Would it be sufficient to require that prior to a certificate of occupancy? Would that meet the same objective?
That would meet the same objective, and that would allow them to continue on their construction schedule. And it probably would be best if it was platted finally. I'm not sure when the warranty deed was actually created, but the applicant's representative probably has that information, or might have that information.
Any other questions for staff? May we have the petitioner's representative, and please state and spell your name for the record, and then let us know how much time you'd like to save for rebuttal.
My name is Wendy Wilber, W-E-N-D-E-W-I-L-B-E-R. I'm with ECI Higher Architecture, and I'm representing Panda Express and CFT Developments. And I would like to acknowledge that Susan Wong, the representing Panda and CFT, flew in from California to be here tonight. And we had one other representative, but his plane was delayed for 4 hours and he didn't make it. So, yeah. So thank you for having us, Margaret. Thank you for such a thorough report. I will just start where John left with the plat and not go over everything again. We are asking for approval of this rezone tonight with the condition of the plat being removed. It is an existing lot of record per code 21.75020. In the old code says if a lot existed before 1972, then it is legally created and it is a existing lot of record. There is no platting requirement. This lot was first deeded, as we could chase it back to 1965, and we quit looking at that point. And it has actually been transferred by deed in 65, 77, 95, 2006, and 2015. It is also has multiple utility easements. Northern Lights Boulevard, DOT took an easement from it. The municipality of Anchorage took an easement from it as recently as 2015, and there has never been a platting requirement associated with that. So we respectfully request that that condition be removed altogether. The other items I think I'd like to just talk about is the proposed development for this is going to be a Panda Express restaurant. So more orange chicken coming to Anchorage. It will be street oriented. It's about a 7,000 square foot development. You know, it's tough with a rezone because you don't want to get too far down your development pathway with a solid design and building elevations until you know that the project is able to go forward. So it's always a fine balancing act. In addition to the Panda Express restaurant, we'll have some small retail, maybe something like hair cutting, maybe another small restaurant, but very neighborhood oriented. Right now, the way that the parcel's looking is we'll have a nice glass storefront on West Northern Lights Boulevard. Although we don't have access to it, we can put a plaza and some extra landscaping there, recognizing that it really is the entrance into Turnagain neighborhood. So we're trying to acknowledge that with our development. And the plaza will connect into the Northern Lights sidewalk and onto the transit bus system. With that, I would probably like to just entertain questions and save the rest of my time for rebuttal.
Thank you. You have just over 7 minutes for rebuttal. Are there any questions for the petitioner's representative or the petitioner? Okay. Hearing and seeing none. What is the will of the body in this case? I'm sorry, we'll open the case for public testimony. Is there anyone here from the public wishing to testify? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Margaret Auth. The last name is spelled A-U-T-H. I'm here as the representative for Spenard Community Council, so I guess I get 5 minutes.
Could you spell that again for us?
It's M-A-R-G-A-R-E-T-A-U-T-H.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're representing,
Spinard Community Council, and I don't see the little light there that usually
we'll get
indicates.
that here in 1 second.
Okay, thank you.
This isn't our normal job. Usually down here.
I won't tell the real chair. The Spinard Community Council has been pretty consistent on, we're very strongly for commercial interests, and we're support the business community, but we're also very strongly in support of maintaining the integrity of residential neighborhoods. It's been a constant battle for us, especially along the Spinard corridor, Spinard Road corridor. There's been many, many rezones over the years from R3 or R4 to B3. Unfortunately, what happens generally is that it doesn't enhance the neighborhoods, and that loss of residential land that was potential for filling our much-needed housing problems right now is now permanently tied up into B3, which is a more expensive property, and therefore people are not so keen to be putting multifamily units. So if you drive along Spinard Road, what you generally see are a lot of rental lots, places for people to park their cars, or car lots. There's as Mr. Agnew was talking about, there's an enterprise. But unfortunately, the problem is we have bad mistake on bad mistake that former commissioners made and the Assembly approved, that now the residents are living with the results. And as someone who has been a part of Spinard for over 30 years, I've seen this happen. And what we're asking is our main concern is that this is still another instance of someone taking RO and turning it into B3. And the unfortunate thing is we're not seeing anything that goes into the column that says, how are we going to address this overhang right now that we have of lack of housing that is so high on the mayor's list right now, how to address this, keeping our workers here in Anchorage instead of having them drive 45 miles every day. I mean, it's good policy to have your workers here in town rather than going in avalanche areas or places where a moose might be hit. Today, the Glen Highway was closed for a couple hours after a multi-car accident. So the thing is that we recognize that we're close in, we're in a very viable area to provide workers if there's places for people to live. And we're also in one of the oldest communities. We're older than Anchorage, and we have old neighborhoods. And everybody knows about the log cabins and everything that's dots along Spinard Road, and even now. And so this is our concern, is that I worked on the West Anchorage District Plan, and believe me, when we set that boundary, they wanted to move it over there, and everybody who was on that committee said, Spinard Road and Upper Spinard Road around Beartooth and everything is really where the commercial stuff is happening. That's what's really vibrant. That's where a lot of changes are happening. So why don't we move it to the east? And after a lot of protests from Spinard Community Council, we were able to at least move it to Arctic. And that's why this is actually an amendment to that district plan. It is not inside of it, and there's a reason for that, and that is because we wanted to have a cutoff that was not going to continue down West Northern Lights and Benson. And that's why it ended there. And this is an amendment to still push it further. And I know that Mr. Spinelli did make a comment, I'm sorry, Chuck Spinelli, that he was not able to rezone to B3. And he raises a good question, which is, how do you argue, if you allow this to go through, how do you argue that the people that are further down and outside of this West Anchorage District Plan boundary, how do you then say, no, you cannot be B3? You're setting it up for future problems for this body to deal with. of how are you fair with members of the community. So the community council voted unanimously to oppose it, and we understand that it's an odd piece of property, but we've seen people do other things with properties that nobody expected, such as what Rustic Goat has turned into, and it's happened. So it's not as though this is something outside any kind of interest of the commercial community. So that is why the Spenard Community Council is begging this body to please allow us to keep some of our residential land uses.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for, I don't want to botch your name, so.
Off.
Okay. Mr. Spring and then Mr. Spinelli.
Yeah, thank you, Margaret, for testifying. You are consistent on your on the issues regarding housing. I appreciate that. I guess I see this a little bit differently as far as the other cases that we've dealt with on Spenard Road. And the RO district obviously allows offices. And there's 2 office buildings to the west of this site already in the RO zone. I suspect if it wasn't rezoned, it would probably go office in any case. I don't think there's probably much demand for housing in between a fairly intensive commercial use and grocery store and offices. It seems like it's logical that the commercial extend that way. Now, usually RO is supposed to protect residential, right? There's supposed to be a buffer between the commercial and residential. In this case, it isn't buffering this property. This property is right between the RO and it's kind of the reverse of what's supposed to happen. So I guess I don't agree with you about the appropriateness of housing in this particular parcel. It seems like it would be a very difficult sell to build it and to rent it as commercial, as apartments or residential.
May I respond? About 15 years ago or something, before the community council, we had people coming before us asking to rezone what is now Home Depot and Office Depot and Lowe's. And the argument was, who would want to live on Tudor? Well, the problem is that now we have all those multi-story office buildings. We have a lovely park just adjacent to this library, and it's really sad that workers who could have been living right there and walking to work, utilizing the park on their breaks or lunches, that opportunity is gone. And that is why the Spenard Community Council's had this very consistent way of looking at it. Is I understand what you're saying. It makes a lot of sense. But what we're saying is that we don't know what's going to happen down the road. And if a developer came along with a Rustic Goat idea where we would be able to have a restaurant and we would be able to have a place for people to live above it, West Anchorage really isn't, I mean, it certainly does not have the volume of traffic as Tudor does, and it's pretty slow after the rush hour in the evening. I used to live on Arlington, and the house I lived on backed up to Northern Lights, which was about a block and a half from where this petition site is. So I think a lot of people's ideas about what is desirable have changed a lot in the last 10 years even, and I think a lot of millennials are looking for places that have mass transit, they want entertainment, and places that they could ride their bikes or spend their times in the evenings and with their families. I think that's changing a lot, and think that's what we're asking this body to do, is to kind of think what is going to be down the line in 15, 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Spinelli, do you still have a question?
I withdrew my question.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. Is anyone else here to testify in these 2 cases? state and spell your name for the record.
Good evening. My name is Robert Auth, A-U-T-H. And I would just like to add, I've been active in the Spinard Community Council for years, although I'm not an officer presently. And we did have this issue on our agenda at the December meeting, and the petitioner did not show up. So we had no input from the petitioner as to what was going on this property. And that was one of the reasons, frankly, why the community council did vote against this rezone. We had nobody to give us to make a pitch for us. The other issue with regard to RO is it is a buffer. If you go to the east, it's B3 for miles along that corridor. But going west, you're getting into Lois is residential, Turnagain's residential. It is a transition place going from B3 to residential as you go west on Northern Lights, and Benson links up. And there is RO right across Benson, the big condominium project. That's very close to this project. So there are people that very much want to live in this area. There's building on Lois all the time and off of Lois. And I do agree that probably if this goes forward, then the RO next to it is going to want to go B3, and maybe they've got, maybe they'll have other plans where they're going to go vertical. And I just think that the residential should be maintained, and people talk about multi-use. Why can't we mix commercial and residential? Well, RO is the only zoning that allows multi-use, that allows that office at the bottom and residential on top. And we're going to lose that opportunity in this neighborhood. So, thank you.
Thank you. We do have a question, Mr. Spinelli.
So, I decided not to ask it before, but now I got to ask it. Do you remember this property containing a Dairy Queen for years and years and years?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I'm just imagining it or not.
Because I guess I just wasn't seeing the huge difference from what was there forever. What I remember growing up was a Dairy Queen and now a Panda. But I was just curious if I would.
Okay.
I wasn't sure if that was where the gas station was or this lot, but.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else here to testify in this case? Hearing and seeing no one, public testimony is closed. Oh, you do have, yes. You have 7 minutes for rebuttal.
Thank you. While I also respect the integrity of residential neighborhoods and understand the housing situation in Anchorage and definitely support this, I think that this is a really unique rezone. This is an island, essentially. You have a major shopping center on one side. You have West Northern Lights on the other side, Benson. Just those two roads alone, you have 26,000 vehicles passing by this parcel. That's not highly desirable for a residential development. In addition, since the Spinard, or the West Anchorage District Plan was passed, a gas station has gone in. So you'd essentially be putting residents right next to a gas station. Again, not highly desirable. And this triangle of land is separated on the west side as well by another roadway. So it does not directly abut residential property. And I think sometimes that we forget RO is actually a commercial zone. And the way the code is written, it allows about 25% of the square footage can be retail or restaurant. That's not much when you look at adding parking code and landscaping and trying to turn this into anything. And I also appreciate the comment about the Rustic Goat, but if you remember, the Rustic Goat had to have special zoning, and it was a trial case to see how well it would work. And we all know that the parking didn't work so well, and they actually had to acquire another parcel for that. I also think the Rustic Goat is a really good example of how desperate these neighborhoods are for some local neighborhood-oriented restaurants and commercial where they can walk to and not drive so far. We've got great pedestrian connectivity. We have overpasses. We have West High. This is an opportunity to expand that town center with appropriate scale development where people can go and not get in their cars and drive across to the east side of Spenard. B3 does not preclude housing, but we also need to recognize that this parcel has been vacant for more than a decade. It was a Dairy Queen at one point, and then I believe South Central Foundation had it as a child care center for a while, and that was torn down. So Safeway and Cars were never able to develop this under RO. And unfortunately, as we enter a recession and oil prices continue to decline, there is a glut of office space on the market. And that glut will continue for a while. This parcel will not turn, and it will not pencil out to develop. So what I think we have is a really appropriate scaled, neighborhood-oriented development that will actually not generate a lot of new traffic, but capture some of those 26,000 cars that go by it every day, where you can stop on your way home and grab dinner, or walk up there and grab dinner, which is very much in keeping with the Rustic Goat. And as a last point, you know, part of what we have to go to is by existing reports that are with the planning department. And there is a commercial report that was done for this area, and it identified, it was done in 2012, and it said that there is between a 39 and 198 acre undersupply of commercial land in this area. That's pretty significant. The West Anchorage District Plan shows that 37% of the area is zoned residential, yet only 22% is developed. Only 2.5% of the West Anchorage District area is zoned commercial. And some of that is because there's a shortage of B3 land, some of that is in industrial. So I think this is more than appropriate, and I think that it actually does serve as a buffer to that gas station and probably protects the offices that are next door. So respectfully ask for your approval.
Thank you. Ms. Bailey has a question.
Just a follow-up from Spenard Community Council's comment. Is there a reason that you did not attend their community council?
It is not required by code, unfortunately, and it was the holidays. I will say that I did get a call from the Turingan Community Council. They asked me a lot of questions about it, and did not submit a comment based on that. So the community councils did reach out to me.
Thank you, Mr. Spinelli.
Has the petitioner owned the property for a long time, or was it for sale before?
The petitioner just closed on the property in November, and literally the day they closed, we put in our application for the rezone.
And do you know how long the property was for sale before that, or?
I do not know. Alicia, do you? Probably 5 years. 5 years.
Yeah, I thought it was sometime.
And it's not the first time this rezone has come up, but I think conditions have changed with the gas station, with the new configuration of Northern Lights in Benson.
Thank you. Anything further? Any other questions for the petitioner representative? What is the will of the body?
Thank you.
Mr. Watt.
So they're ordered on our agenda tonight with the rezone first and the amendment to the comprehensive plan second. I guess I just, as a point of order, do we want to get rid of the comprehensive plan issue first and make the rezone easier, or does it matter? I mean, if for example, if we approve the rezone and did not approve the comprehensive plan change, then that would be an inconsistent way to do it.
I would think so, and Mr. Pennell?
One thing, if we weren't going to approve the rezone, then there would be no need to even take up the plan. I would think.
Then let's just go home. Okay. In the matter of case 2016-0001, the request to rezone from RO to B3, I move to approve the application with staff comment. Let's see, staff recommendations. I was just looking for that plating. I think the plating requirement was on the comprehensive plan application, is that right? Oh, there it is. Okay. Well, let's go with department recommendations, and if anybody wants to amend, we can work on that plating requirement if we need to.
And we have a second from Commissioner Spinelli. Mr. Walker, do you care to speak to your motion?
I tend to agree. I will be supporting the motion. I tend to agree with the applicant's representative. This is, I think, a timely development in this area. I do agree that this is a bit of an island with the Benson Northern Lights couplet, sort of cutting it off from the residential areas. And I don't necessarily see another rustic goat getting developed here, and I definitely don't see pure residential getting developed on this site. RO is a commercial district, and so I don't see this as a really significant amendment, other than to just allow something that probably should be allowed on this site in the first place. It's consistent with 2020 plan. We need to address the West Anchorage District plan, and then in all other ways, it appears to be consistent with in the best interest of the public with regard to the environmental impacts and transportation impacts and other impacts. So.
Thank you. Ms. Bailey?
I just want to echo Commissioner Walker's points. I agree with everything he laid out there. I also just want to say that I do have empathy for both the offs that came to speak. I think they brought up good points. However, just based on the fact that this really is an island of a property that while we could hope that hold out for another 20 years and the ideal development will come in, this is a development that's consistent with what appears to be the plan. It's consistent with that area and the areas next to it, and I don't think it takes away the buffer that the RO to the west of it is providing.
Thank you. Mr. Spring?
Could I ask staff a question? It pertains to a motion I want to make.
I mean, we've got a motion and a second on the floor. But if
It would be an amendment, actually.
An amendment?
Yes.
Sure. Why not?
Staff, if I wanted to make a motion to make the, let's see, to apply a special limitation regarding certificate of occupancy to be required, a plat to be done prior to certificate of occupancy, would that be a special limitation or a condition of approval? It wouldn't be effective clause, I believe.
Through the chair, it would be a special limitation that would be accomplished at some point in the future.
Okay, thank you. I would like to make a motion, if I could, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Yes, adding a special, deleting the effective clause and adding a special limitation requiring that a final plat be recorded at the Alaska District Recorder's Office for the parcel prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy.
Mr. Spring has a motion on the floor. Do we have a second? I'm sorry, that motion does not go forward. We're back to the original motion. Do you have an amendment?
Amendment, yes.
Okay.
I move that we amend the original motion to remove the requirement to plat. The lot exists, and to me, it seems like a waste of time and money.
So we have a motion to amend, removing
the requirement to plat.
as outlined on page 10. We have a second? Mr. Walker, did you want to speak to that amendment, or did you?
Yeah, I'm not quite ready to second Mr. Spinelli's motion. I guess I wanted to kind of sync up and reconcile what's going on with John and with Andre here. So was it your intent to condition the rezone on this particular development? Is that what you were trying to do with your amendment?
That's correct.
So that they're not going to rezone to B3 and then we're going to end up with another gas station or something like that? I mean, was that your objective?
No, hopefully I was clear that my objective was to require the final plat as the staff requested, but not make it a effective clause, rather make it a special limitation that it have to be recorded prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy. In that way, it wouldn't hold up the development. They could proceed with the development and not be delayed too severely, but yet we could still get a platted parcel.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Mr. Spinelli.
I just guess I wanted to just speak to John's request. Is that I guess my issue with that is if they're going to start building, they're going to probably have a commercial loan on the property. The bank will have a lien, which will then hold up the platting requirement. Your commercial loan would then have to sign off on the plat. And typically commercial lenders, unless you are going into it as a development to replat the property, and in this case they're not replanting, it seems just messy and complicated for a lot that legally exists today. If you looked at it on a piece of paper, it'd look no different than any other platted lot. It's just not a plat.
Mr. Spinelli has a motion to remove that requirement, seconded by Mr. Spring. Any discussion on that motion? Please use your machines to vote on the amendment. Are you up or down? Okay. Ms. Bailey votes yay on that, as do the other commissioners present, so that motion carries. Back to the main motion. Any other discussion on the main motion?
Quick question.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
If I may, through the chair. So just to be clear, if we approve this rezone, is there an opportunity for the applicant to develop whatever they want on this site as long as it conforms to B3? Or, I mean, obviously, I think our remarks are pretty clear. We're approving it on the basis of the proposed development, and I think we're all imagining a fairly specific type of development here. And if there's a Texaco station on it a year from now, I mean, that would definitely be outside the spirit and intent of what we're hoping to do here.
Through the chair, Mr. Walker, technically you're correct. If it's B3, they can do whatever they want, provided they could put a Texaco on there.
Is there a precedent in a situation like this that you're aware of to condition the rezone on a particular use? And I don't want to box them into a corner too badly here, but I guess I just want to make sure that.
Through the chair, Mr. Walker, In the past, some commissions have required a site plan to be submitted for the proposed development. An administrative site plan review.
Okay. Thank you. So I move to place another amendment on the, actually, we haven't voted on your amendment yet, have we?
First Amendment passed.
Okay, our first amendment's passed. I'd like to propose a second amendment to my motion to require an administrative site plan review to confirm that, we're getting a restaurant with some retail space. And
Mr. Chair,
yes. Oh,
I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Walker, but you said there was an approved amendment, but I've only seen 4 votes. It takes a full 5.
Unfortunately, Ms. Bailey's machine is not working, and she gave us a verbal and a kind of thumbs up because her machine, there's something going on with her machine. And so that's why I had made note that she had voted yay, as did the rest of the commissioners, on that amendment.
So which amendment passed?
That was the amendment to remove
The
requirement to plat. And so we've got, Mr. Walker now is making another motion. And can you restate your motion, Mr. Walker? And I know, Mr. Spring, you were in the queue. Was there something? I'm just trying to get this thing like point of order here and procedurally get through this thing. So, Mr. Walker, you made a motion, and you have.
So I would like to add another contingency here along with the existing department recommendation, which is that an administrative site plan review would be required to confirm that the use is consistent with the use proposed in order to get this rezone.
That motion is seconded by Mr. Spring. Mr. Spring, would you like to speak to that motion?
Yeah, I like the motion, and I'll be supporting it. I wish we had a little bit more time to think about it a little bit. It is true this is a town center, and in my opinion, even though it's not designated as a land use as a town center, the comp plan shows this amorphous type of area, and it's clearly supposed to be a town center type of development in this area. And that means a couple things if you read the comp plan. That means you shouldn't have gas stations in there. It should be pedestrian oriented. You shouldn't have strip commercial. It should be something that retail that is, or services that are everyday type of things that people need in the area so they can walk there. And I think that's a good motion. I think I would have preferred to gone another route, maybe, which is more common, listing a set of special limitations, eliminating some of the uses that might not be appropriate in a town center. And I don't think I'm really capable really of listing all those right now. And there'd be maybe 6 or 7 or 8, like a gas station that I could list. So in lieu of that, I'll be supporting Commissioner Walker's motion.
Anybody else like to speak to this amendment? Please use your machines to vote, or your thumbs. That motion carries. And we're back to the main motion. Me too. Do you second the main motion? I don't think we have the main motion seconded. So, Miss Bailey seconded. Sorry, we didn't capture that. Any discussion on the main motion? And please use your machines to vote. And Ms. Bailey votes yay. That motion carries. Thank you.
point of order, one more motion then for the land use plan.
That's correct. Thank you, Mr. Spring.
I guess I'll give it a try if you don't mind. With respect to case number 2016-002, amendment to the West Anchorage Plan, move to approve the amendments to Exhibit 4-1A West Anchorage Land Use Plan and to Exhibit 4-1C Turnagain-Spenard Land Use Detail to change the land use classification from low office intensity to town center.
Do we have a second? Ms. Bailey seconds that. Oh, sorry, Mr. Spinelli beat you guys to the punch. Would you just push it once, man? Come on. Ms. Bailey seconds the motion. Mr. Spring, would you like to speak to your motion?
Just to reiterate some of the information we've talked about before about this rezoning, yeah, I think it does fall into compliance with the intent of the comprehensive plan. This is just an adjustment to the West Anchorage plan, in my opinion, to make it consistent with the general comprehensive plan. And I think it will be a benefit to the community and provide some services and places to eat for the residences in the nearby area that they can walk to, et cetera, in the spirit of the town center.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. Anyone else like to speak to the motion? Mr. Walker.
Only I will be supporting the motion, and I mean, just this is right on the threshold of the town center designation as it is. So I mean, we're really just moving that line a very, very small distance. So seems to make sense here.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Please use your machines to vote. And Ms. Bailey votes yay. That motion carries. Moving on to case 2016-0007, an amendment to Title 21. May we have the staff report?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Planning Department proposes amendments to the Girdwood land use regulations. The amendments were requested by the Girdwood Board of Supervisors with a resolution that's attached to this packet. Section 1 of the proposed ordinance makes general manufacturing uses in the GC-10 subject to building design standards. Section 2 adds the manufacturing general use to the table of allowed uses. The amendment would bring the table of allowed uses in Girdwood and in Anchorage closer to matching because we only have one set list of use types. The section would also make manufacturing general use type a conditional use in the GC-10. The manufacturing general use type would be permitted in the would be a permitted use in the GI-1 and the GI-2 industrial districts. The department's recommending approval of the amendments proposed in this draft ordinance. Be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Spring has a question.
Yes, I'm not clear what is intended to be built in this district, in this parcel.
Well,
I mean, what is the problem we're trying to solve here?
I think basically there's only two small areas of industrial land in Girdwood, and one of the industrial zones is owned by AWU and Solid Waste Services. And then another does not. So one's publicly held, right, and it's not available to private, business. And then the other area is like at the end of Crow Creek Mine Road or something. They're areas that don't have access to public water, and so a brewery is not is essentially zoned out of Girdwood, and the community's kind of spoken and said, well, we'd like the ability to have a brewery, and the way to do that is to allow all manufacturing general uses into Girdwood for one, because that's where breweries are. Currently, it's not a use type that's even in Girdwood, because the timing of when Girdwood regulations were approved years ago, and I think in 1995, and our new code, they don't match up quite right. That's basically it.
If I could follow up, is there alcohol going to be served at this brewery? I mean, a tasting room of sorts, or what?
Yes. Well, let me back up. The brewery license issued by the state allows for tasting rooms and limited. It's limited in the amount of quantity and the amount that you can serve to an individual. It's like maximum 2 pints per person. You go in and pick up growlers and that. So there's the state licensure limits the amount of alcohol that can be served to an individual to be consumed on property and also to take away. Should this ordinance be effectuated, approved by the Assembly, then manufacturing general use type would be allowed in the GC10, subject to a conditional use permit and complying with the Girdwood commercial design standards. The folks that want to build a brewery would then have to apply for a conditional use permit and design their building to meet the design standards, but they could, if the conditional use permit is approved by the commission, the Planning and Zoning Commission, then they could have a brewery there, and they could have a tasting room. Separately, they have to apply for conditional use brewery license. No, separately, they could have a tasting room if they decide to build one and it's approved by the commission.
Through the chair, currently there's a brew pub is listed as a use in Girdwood, but not in the GC10. I didn't see any definition of brew pub in the Title 21. Why would that not work?
It would work a brew pub. So the GC10 is a commercial district. You could have a hotel, you could have a bar and a restaurant in there. Those are all already allowed, and you could have a brew pub.
Would that work for this? Could you?
No, I think the brewery folks don't want to have a brew pub license. They don't want to have a restaurant. They just want to focus on brewing beer.
And so, it's hard for me to understand what the differences, the distinctions are between the various types of licenses for liquor. I'm not sure what they are. What about the intent language for the GC10? Does that need to be changed? It doesn't say anything currently about industrial.
Well, the department's not proposing to change the intent statement because we are not seeking to change the intent of the GC10 district, just to introduce a new use to be required by a conditional use permit and having to meet the building design standards.
But the intent doesn't say anything about manufacturing whatsoever.
That's correct.
That's not what standard policy to make the intent reflect the uses that are allowed?
I'm not a drafter of intent statements, but I think that the intent statement, I think that we deliberately chose not to change it because we're not seeking to change the intent of the GC10.
Anything further, Mr. Spring? Mr. Spinelli.
Kind of following Mr. Spring's line of thought, I think. Was there a reason that you just didn't include brewery in the zoning rather than going for all manufacturing?
The way that the new code works, the use type manufacturing general, which has a bunch of manufacturing types, includes breweries. So we have a limited list of use types that are on that list, and brewery is within one of those. You can see why brewery manufacturing general. It's just not a separate,
Okay. Yeah. And one more. The Board of Supervisors for Girdwood, they pretty much wrote the Girdwood Chapter 21, so we should really just, if they said it's good, then we should just be following their lead. Is that
I mean, the department's position, if this is what Girdwood wants, then we're trying to assist them. We're responding to the public's will to have this, and the ordinance that we've drafted follows the resolution, precisely. We're not going above it or less than it. We're just doing exactly what they've asked for.
Any other questions? I have one just with regard to manufacturing in the commercial district. What about, and I know we don't know what the Assembly is going to do yet with manufacture of marijuana, but would that be the case if we, in this commercial zoning? I can't remember if we covered that. What is it, last week or whenever?
Well, actually, I can find. So I did not write the ordinance on marijuana, but
I just can't remember
I read it a couple
it.
weeks ago. Let's just see if they create a new use type for marijuana, or if they. No, it's a special land use permit. So it would be just like, alcohol licenses, that it's something outside of the use table. It's if you're in a commercial or an industrial area, then you can apply for a special land use permit for alcohol. The restrictions on marijuana are a little bit more restrictive than alcohol, and they're a little bit different. There's just four license types, and like you said, we'll have to wait and see what the Assembly ultimately does. There is a church and there is residential nearby, so and there's a park also.
That's right.
So
yep, you're right.
yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't.
We don't know if this would qualify, but having said that, putting the word manufacturing in there, if it is or happens to be within whatever distances the Assembly ends up approving, that's here nor there right now. I was just getting more curious than it.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a curiosity. It's something that we should sort of keep in mind. But I didn't come prepared to say whether or not this meets the draft proposed buffer distances.
That's fine.
But it very well may not.
No, thank you, Mr. Walker.
Through the chair, I have a question for staff. I agree. I think this is a good use for this property, but I can't help but be a little bit uneasy about the idea of opening up this manufacturing door and just imagining the unintended consequences. Oil goes to $10 a barrel next week, and they can't build a brewery, and the next thing you know, somebody moves a car crusher onto this thing, and now we got real problems. So can you elaborate a little bit? Like, what was the discussion that was had internally within the department about any unintended consequences and how they might be mitigated?
One could not have a car crusher. It's required in the that's a heavy industrial use that I have to look at which use type that is, but that's not one that. And some of those more intense uses have specific standards with buffer distances themselves. I think what you're looking for is what does general manufacturing allow, and I could tell you what it is.
Let's talk about that. Yeah.
And then, you know, you'll just have to keep in mind that any one of these uses would have to apply for a conditional use permit, and the building would have to meet the Girdwood residential design standards, which are, you know, pretty detailed. It's led to some of the good quality, you know, development that we've seen. So let me flip to manufacturing general. Manufacturing light, manufacturing, Koch Crafts, manufacturing general. Yeah, so manufacturing heavy or maybe recycling, solid waste, something. But what you were proposing is not, it definitely would not be included. Okay, so the definition of manufacturing general: an establishment engaged in manufacturing predominantly from previously prepared materials or finished products or parts, including processing, fabrication, assembly, treatment, and packaging of such products, and incidental storage, sales, and distribution of such products, but excluding basic industrial processing. This use includes additive three-dimensional printing, manufacturing. This use does not include or utilize toxic, hazardous, or explosive materials or large quantities as part of a manufacturing process. Examples include, but are not limited to, airplane, automobile, or truck assembly, repair, or railroad equipment, beverage manufacturer or brewery, boat building, cabinet shops, machine or blacksmith shops, metalworking or welding shops, paint shops, processing and or dressing of skins, or printing, publishing, and lithography.
So I'm going to stop you right there, Francis. So it does include boat building, painting, and welding. So my car crusher example was hyperbole, so
Sure.
I'm going to pull that off the table. But let's talk about boat building, painting, and welding. I mean, I guess those are things that I think would be an absolute tragedy. I mean, I know this site well. I'd hate to see those things happening there. But so if any of those uses were proposed for this site, they would have to, first of all, you could weld outside on the site, right? I mean, we're talking light industrial uses is mostly what I'm hearing from you. So you could lay up a fiberglass boat on this site outdoors?
Yes.
On the surface, which I think the past owner of this property actually has done that. Not on this site, but I don't know. Do you have a concern about this? I mean, I'm worried about this myself, so I mean, this gives me a little bit of anxiety. But do you feel like that those unintended consequences are that we're protecting ourselves against that?
You know. This is introducing traditionally industrial use to a commercial zoning district, but we believe with the requirement to obtain a conditional use permit and the building having to comply with the residential or with the commercial design standards, so the building will have to have some degree of quality and you know, architectural facade treatment, no like long buildings with no roof lines and uninterrupted. It'll get a higher level of architecture, and then you know this commission will be able to say no to any conditional use application for boat building or so forth. Also, you could require certain buffering, you know, landscaping and fencing. That you think is appropriate, or that the commission finds is necessary to protect sensitive land uses around it. You know, again, the department's position is that the Girdwood Board of Supervisors and, you know, at least 2 letters of support that were laid on the table from members of the public are asking for this. And the department supports their request and is recommending approval.
Anything further, Mr. Walker?
Yeah, I have a follow-up question, if I may, through the chair. So just to be 100% clear here, if this site is not developed as proposed, you could paint a car, build a boat, or weld something on the you could use the site as a laydown yard, or you could do something like that on the surface of the site without building a structure, and you would not need a conditional use permit to do it. Is that correct?
Storage yard is still prohibited.
Okay.
I think that the definition that I read said that an establishment engaged in preparing materials, and the outdoor part may be limited in that definition. Let's just see here. Finished products, treatment, distribution of products, product utilized. Well, I'm not seeing anything that's limiting what can be outdoors, but anything that would be proposed would have to be approved by the commission.
Thank you.
Mr. Spring.
It seems like there could have been a more subtle way of getting what we need here, and you were pretty free to develop the Girdwood code separately from the Anchorage code, correct? You don't need to follow any particular guidelines from the Anchorage. Is it possible to add a use to the G10 which just says brewery, and then under the use specific standards define a brewery in accordance with what the owners are planning to do, so that it would be allowed, just the brewery would be allowed?
That would make a brewery available in this use type, plus, yeah, it would be sort of duplicative in two places. The Anchorage Bowl table of allowed uses and the Girdwood table of allowed uses would be incongruent. I guess what you're proposing, I'm not quite sure how that would look, if that would really, I mean, it might work, I'm not sure.
Well, through the chair, it's already a little incongruent, because I think brew pubs, which I don't know the definition of because there's no definition, are allowed in Girdwood but not specifically mentioned in Anchorage. So why couldn't you have a brewery use? If it's different from a brew pub, I don't know what a brew pub is. So, but define it under the use specific standards where most of the definitions are defined, and then it would be allowed without having to have a general manufacturer.
Mr. Spring, you would still be introducing general manufacturing to the GC10. I mean, if you look at it that way. I mean, you wouldn't be introducing all of the uses that we've listed, but you'd be introducing breweries, which are general manufacturing.
Anything else, Mr. Spring? Thank you. We'll open this up for anything else from the staff?
No.
We'll open this up for public testimony. Is anyone here to testify in case 2016-0007? Yes, sir. Please come up, state your name. Spell it, actually, please, for us.
My name is Rory Marenko, R-O-R-Y-M-A-R-E-N-C-O.
Hang on one second.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm representing Girdwood Brewing Company as a future business owner affected by this text amendment. From our understanding, the original Chapter 2109, which is the Girdwood Land Use Regulations, excluded general manufacturing and therefore beverage manufacturing and brewing from Girdwood, which appears to be an oversight considering the potential socioeconomic benefits that can be attributed to craft breweries in this day and age. A craft brewery, it's not a bar or a tavern, as Alaska statutes clearly limit the hours of operation and the serving quantities on premise. And what this does is it fosters the notion that craft beer is about quality rather than quantity. The brewery is centered around a community tap room concept where neighbors come to discuss local issues, and this kind of reinforces that commitment to quality over quantity. As the first craft brewery in Girdwood, we would pride ourselves on being locally owned and operated. This is a business that diversifies and strengthens Girdwood's economy by attracting visitors who support other local establishments. And all in all, I think this represents a positive change to the land use regulations. As far as the difference between a brewery and a brew pub, they're distinguished in the Alaska statutes. When you go for licensing, a brew pub is basically a restaurant that happens also to brew beer. There's limitations on the volume that you can brew each year, and you're not limited on your servings. You can serve a patron as much as you want. Our goal wasn't to introduce another restaurant into Girdwood, but simply to introduce craft beer there. So that's the mentality behind pursuing a brewery rather than a brew pub. We met with the planning and zoning to try to figure out beforehand the best method of accomplishing this, and then went back through the land use committee and board of supervisors to try to make sure that we were transparent and everyone was aware of what we were trying to accomplish. So.
Thank you. Any questions? Mr. Walker.
Does the organization that is developing the brewery, do you own this site now, or?
No, we've talked to the owner and we've been looking at a few different places down there for a while, and it kind of only recently came to our attention that we realized that we needed to be industrial zoned, and the only, as referenced in the staff report, the only industrial zoned areas that there either aren't for sale or they don't. Well, first, they don't allow general manufacturing, and there's no utilities to them either. So one of the biggest hurdles for startup businesses is the operating expenses that you incur, costs. So the guy that owns the land right now is going to do a build-to-suit option, which would pretty much cut our operating costs or our startup costs in a third, which would allow us to basically potentially make it. So. Okay.
Do you need, so are you operating as a brewery now?
No.
Okay. So this is a pretty good sized site,
it is.
as far as I know. And I'm imagining a startup brewery. So I remember when King Street fired up, they were in 2,500 square feet, and they've since, they're busting at the seams nowadays.
Exactly.
As you probably know. But so how much space do you really need? I guess what I'm trying to get at here is, does this entire site need to be included in this, and what's going to happen? We're going to allow manufacturing on one part of the site for you, and then what's that going to do to the balance of the site?
Right. He's looking at developing one section. I think it's about an acre, maybe a little larger, and building one building on there, to my knowledge, which is going to be about 4,000 square feet. Initially, we'd probably only house about half of that, but it seems to be the number one need is to just expand for craft breweries. So we'd start probably 2,000, 2,500, and then potentially expand to 4,000 in the coming years. Would be our goal.
Okay. Do you live in Girdwood?
Not currently, but I have on and off for the past 6 or 7 years, and I would move down there if I was employed down there.
Sure. Would you have any concerns about other unintended uses on a site if we open this door too wide? Or obviously, I agree. I think this is a necessary thing.
Through learning more and more about the land use regulations and going through code stuff, it seemed to be that if anything was to try to get in there's multiple administrative hurdles in the way that they'd have to go through. They'd have to go through the land use committee again, the board of supervisors, the planning and zoning, and the assembly for the conditional use permit process, and so it didn't seem likely that, and then once again the commercial building regulations, which would be for someone that was just trying to build a paint shop, it seems it would be excessive in terms of construction costs for them to pursue something like that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir. Anyone else here to testify? Please come forward. State your name.
Hi, my name is Josh Hegna, Joshhegna, and like Rory, my dream is to own a craft brewery in Girdwood too. In any small Alaska community, it's important for a small business to have the support of the community in order to be successful. We've been super proactive and transparent with the community of Girdwood. so that we can earn this support. In addition to having 2 children that do attend Girdwood School, I work, coach kids sports, shop, and play in this unique community. It's my home, and I want to be part of it. I want this brewery to be part of it and make it a great place to live, but also a desirable place to visit. So I agree with you on some of these, subjects that you guys have brought up, and I don't want that in my community, and I don't think it's going to go down like that. So here's what we've done as far as community outreach. Last summer, Rory and his twin brother, Brett, who's away right now, introduced our concept and presented it at the land use committee meetings and with the Girdwood Board of Supervisors. And as Francis stated, they were super supportive of this, drafting that letter. Then in early August, Rory and I walked from around Girdwood homes that would be closest to our brewery. Our goals were to meet these potential neighbors and answer any questions they had beforehand about the brewery. We distributed one-page summaries of our plan to 65 homes, and during this time there was an overwhelming support in these door-to-door meetings. In addition to that, I've met with the pastor of the neighboring church on multiple times, gave her flyers to hand out to her congregation, which are, a lot of them are friends of mine, and their kids are friends of my kids. In fact, I saw her today at the post office, and she is super supportive of this and wished us good luck. I've also sat down with a lot of business owners, restaurant owners and whatnot, and they're aware of our intentions and are supportive as well. But the majority of our feedback that we've received has been when sitting around restaurants, fishing, standing in the lift line, other random encounters in town, and the community definitely wants this brewery. Like Sitka, Haines, Kodiak, Homer, Seward, Talkeetna, Healy, and other Alaska small towns, the people of Girdwood will definitely benefit from this brewery. So thanks for your time. If you guys have any questions.
I don't see any in the queue. Am I missing something, Ms. Bailey, since you're... Okay,
Thanks,
you.
yes.
Anyone else here to testify in this case?
My name is Allison Gordy, Allisongordy. I live and work in Girdwood, and I'm actually living in a neighborhood very close to this project, just across the Alyeska Highway. And I will say there's almost unanimous support for this project in Girdwood. Diversification of small business helps small communities grow and thrive, as we've seen in other small communities, as mentioned by Josh, that have opportunities to have an industry like this in place. So I would say the general consensus in my own is to support this project. Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none in the queue. Appreciate it. Anyone else here to testify? Just come forward. State and spell your name slowly. Unless it's Smith.
Hi, my name is Marco Zaccaro, M-A-R-C-O, Z-A-C-C-A-R-O, and had a long list of comments to make, but I'm going to speak to the last comment, or seems to be the most serious concern about allowing the general industrial use designation, opening the door to all kinds of other activities that we may not want in GC10. I'm an architect, and we've done a large number of development projects in Girdwood, and we've been through this, presented before this commission a number of times. We have more experience with the Girdwood land use regulations than any other design firm. And I can say, based on our experience with this book, which is the Girdwood land use regulations, about a third of which devotes itself to the site design standards and commercial building design standards that would be applied to this site, that it would be economically unviable for anybody to put a paint shop or any kind of, I think aircraft manufacturing was listed on there. Things like that would not be viable in this spot. It's right in the middle of Girdwood. It's within easy walking distance of the town center. It's within easy walking distance of the resort. The best and highest use of this property is visitor amenities, visitor support amenities. And, it just so happens because of the oddity of the MOA, the way where they put breweries happens to be in general industrial, that we have to go for this designation. I don't agree with that, craft breweries should be in general industrial. I think it should be in another designation, but that's what we're stuck with, and so that's what we're pursuing. Any questions?
Thank you. Mr. Walker has a question.
I'm sorry, I'm going to keep beating the same drum, but I'm glad you got up to speak, Marco. So I would agree that I don't think it's feasible to put an auto body paint shop in Girdwood. I doubt there's enough demand, but I guess the kinds of unintended consequences I'm worried about are the things that that we don't anticipate. As you may know, and I'm not saying he would or he wouldn't or casting any dispersions at all, but the current owner of the site is a commercial fisherman. We do this, and 2 years from now, there's giant, the brewery doesn't get built for some reason, and now there's fishing boats sitting on the site. Or I guess that's what I'm seeking to avoid here, and I wanted to get your input on that.
Well, I think, any site design will still have to go through a conditional use permit. He wouldn't be able to put roads in a vacant lot. You still have to go through a conditional use permit for whatever goes on that site. If it's, correct me if I'm wrong, Francis, that's correct. So, you'll have to go through a conditional use permit. The site is incredibly difficult to develop as it is. It has about 6 feet of peat on it. So for him to put a road in, dig out the peat, fill it back up with 12 feet of gravel, get his Army Corps permit, then park boats on it, probably is not going to happen.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Anyone else here to testify in this case? Hearing and seeing no one, public testimony is closed. I have Mr. Spring in the queue.
I'd like to make a motion.
Please do.
Okay. I'd like to move to approve the ordinance amending Title 21, new code, subsections 21.09.040C2J and Table 21.09-2 to make general manufacturing a conditional use in the GC10 district subject to the compliance with the commercial design standards, and make general manufacturing a permitted use in the GI1 and GI2 with the following amendments or change to the wording in the ordinance. And that would be under the intent section 21.09.040 C2J I think, and to read as following. The intent of this district is to permit development of a limited range of non-retail commercial uses along with residential uses in a manner compatible with the surrounding residential land use, as well as permit general manufacturing limited to a brewery.
Is that it?
Yeah. And if I could speak to that.
Mr. Spinelli has seconded your motion.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Mr. Spring, would you like to speak?
Yeah, I propose that, and it's, subject to amendment to delete that section that I just added. But we're struggling, of course, with the problem with general manufacturing, which allow truck assembly and paint shops and things that are really clearly not compatible with surrounding uses. Rather than trying to define some use, like I was suggesting earlier, like a brewery and et cetera, I think if we allow the general manufacturing there and requires a conditional use, and we add the intent language for this area to limit manufacturing to a brewery, then at least we have some basis for rejecting the conditional use that comes forward that's not a brewery or something that's not compatible with the intent language. And then we have the option then not to approve it. And it's spelled out here in the ordinance.
Mr. Spinelli and then Mr. Walker.
I support the motion, and as far as your added amendment, my only thought there was that it seems like they would have went specifically for a brewery if they wanted it to, and it was my my own thought that maybe they wanted to allow for some other general manufacturing so they didn't have to repeat this process when somebody decided to put a doll shop together or some other whatever random thing they might think of that they could do to employ themselves in Girdwood and avoid the deadliest highway. So other than that, I'm willing to support it either way. I'm not going to make a motion to amend it, but that was my only comments on the general manufacturing. And I guess that the fact that a conditional use permit is required is no small hurdle to filter out any lay-down yards or snowmobile repair shops.
Mr. Walker, then Ms. Bailey.
I was just going to thank John for, I think this would give me a greater level of comfort. And then again, I would agree, I'd hate to see this exclude something. I was just reading about these guys in Haines that are building skis and in some old boat shop, and I mean that would be a killer use down there too. So I'd hate to limit it too much, but I think I'll support this.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey.
I think I'm kind of on the same boat as everyone else here that we don't want to open up the door too far. We also don't want to close it too far. At this point, I think the motion as proposed does close it too far. I think there's already a couple ways that the land there is protected from unintended uses coming in, such as it has to be compatible with the surrounding residential land use. I think someone could easily say that a boat yard is not compatible with the surrounding land use, and that itself with the special permitting would be a big enough protection. But I would not want to, I think Commissioner Walker brought up a really good potential use. If a ski manufacturing place went in there, that would probably be great, and the people of the community would probably be very interested. So I am a little uncomfortable with the motion as currently proposed, and so I would like to, I guess I'll just later make a motion to amend the motion, or can I do that now?
So we have a motion on the floor,
yeah.
And albeit it doesn't follow exactly what staff proposed, you can make a motion, and then we would vote on that and then vote on the original motion. But it sounds like you're looking at going a different direction. So I'm not going to tell you how to vote or not, but if you're not comfortable with Mr. Springs.
I would like to make a motion to amend his motion to strike the added language, so the intent language would end in residential land use. But everything.
So maybe, just so we get it correct on the record, kind of.
The intent language, so this would be in C2J 2I, the intent of this district is to permit development of a limited range of non-retail commercial uses along with residential uses in a manner compatible with surrounding residential land use.
Okay. So we have an amendment.
If I may, isn't that how it's proposed on the agenda?
Yes.
So if we vote John's motion down and then we pass what's before us, then we've effectively done what you're suggesting.
Point of information, the way that Ms. Bailey's proposes the way that it should be handled through Robert's Rules of Order.
Okay.
Because Mr. Walker, if you vote on Mr. Springs' motion and it fails, any one of you doesn't vote for it, then we're done. We're done.
Okay.
I'll second Ms. Bailey's motion.
Mr. Spinelli seconds. Any discussion on the motion? Mr. Walker, were you in the queue, or was that from before?
That's from before.
Okay, Mr. Spring?
Yeah, I'd like to hear other people's opinion about it. I guess I've always thought that conditional uses, if a use was allowed in conditional use, then it really is it's harder to prove that it shouldn't be allowed if they can show that there's mitigating, they're providing some mitigation. I mean, that's what conditional uses are intended to be. You have to have some degree of confidence that if the ordinance says that something's used is appropriate for that area, then you can build it. Of course, if you have to mitigate any adverse effects. So I guess I'm not really comfortable with being that we're going to be able to turn down all noxious uses that come forward. But I mean, that's how I've dealt with conditional uses, but it may work without my clause, so I'd like to hear what other people have to say.
Mr. Spinelli, go ahead.
My opinion is that we are not afraid to turn things down. And I'm not worried about this body or another one turning things down if it's not the right project. So.
Ms. Bailey.
I would just also like to add that I think the area that is involved here is one with a very highly active community. And so with issues like this, having it be more open-ended, it allows the community to have more of a say. And I think they're also a community that's very vocal when they like something and very vocal when they don't. And so that's one of the reasons that I don't have as much of the same fear as Commissioner Spring.
I will be supporting this amendment, and what gives me some peace of mind and ease, aside from the fact that the community of Girdwood rallies around projects they like, and as equally they rally around projects they don't like. And given the fact that this will require a conditional use permit and the size of public testimony that we generally see in these types of cases that come out of Girdwood, gives me much more comfort about approving this, even though it could open things up. I think given the fact that we've got a conditional use application that has to go through public testimony and staff, I will be supporting this amendment. Any other comments? Use your machines to vote on the amendment. And Ms. Bailey votes yay, as do the rest of the commissioners. That amendment passes. We have an original motion provided by Mr. Spring that has been moved and seconded by Mr. Spinelli. Would you like to discuss that, or we can vote on that motion now?
Just with respect to findings, I think it's good to be able to support some industrial or employment ventures like, and I know a couple of breweries around town, and they fit in very well. And they're a nice addition. Midnight Sun, which is in South Anchorage, and several others are really nice for a community to have. And it is a gathering place. It can be a gathering place. So I'm definitely going to support the motion.
Okay, findings with this motion we just passed? Okay. Correct. I'd like to add as a finding to Ms. Bailey's amendment that it was supported by staff, public testimony, and there were no objections from other reviewing agencies, just for the record. Mr. Walker, you're in the queue.
Yes, I want to clarify. So Ms. Bailey proposed an amendment to Mr. Spring's amended motion, and her amendment effectively, we have approved this as it's written, and now we are going to vote on Mr. Spring's amendment. No, well, you've been talking like we're going to vote again here.
We have a main motion vote have to vote on the main motion. As amended.
Okay.
So if we vote nay, Ms. Bailey's motion passes, is that?
Yeah.
I'm just clarifying what
I
we're
think I can
voting on
clarify.
here.
Yeah, please.
So I believe what has happened is a motion was proposed. That motion amended the staff recommendation. I proposed a motion which reverted Commissioner Springs' motion back to the staff recommended motion now that it's incorporated with my amendment. So now we're essentially voting on the staff's recommended plan of action. I think that's a synopsis, but we still have to vote on that.
That's what I assume. Mr. Spring, you were in the queue.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say. That's exactly right.
Thank you. Please use your machines to vote. And Ms. Bailey votes yay, as do the rest of the commissioners. That passes. Thank you. Look forward to having tasty beverage at the sit some night that you produce. Okay, last case for this evening, 2016-0014, an ordinance amending Title 21 regarding assisted living facilities and habilitative care facilities. May we have the staff report, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On May 5th, 2014, the Assistant Secretary for Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity filed a complaint against the municipality alleging that zoning and land use ordinances discriminated against disabled populations. Since then, the municipality has negotiated a conciliation agreement and voluntary compliance agreement with HUD. Assembly Ordinance 2015-133 was introduced to the Assembly on December 8th in accordance with that compliance agreement with HUD. The Assembly scheduled a public hearing for February 23rd next month in order to allow for the Commission the opportunity to review the draft ordinance. So what does the ordinance do? It changes the definition of family and household to limit the number of unrelated people living together to 5. The definition of habilitative care is changed to include the size distinctions for small, medium, and large habilitative care facilities and put them more in line with the assisted living facilities. Also, the ordinance changes the table of allowed uses for the Anchorage Bowl and the Chugach Eagle River table of allowed uses as well to increase the districts where assisted living facilities and habilitative care facilities are permitted. The ordinance changes the use-specific standards for assisted living facilities and habilitative care facilities, and it does those use-specific standards. There are 4 of them that occupy the type of household living structure that is permitted in the zoning district is a requirement. You must comply with the table of dimensional standards for the applicable residential structure type. The third one is that you have to comply with the residential design standards if it's constructed as of the 1st of this year. And the fourth one is that you have to obtain a conditional use permit if more than 20% of the total gross floor area is not directly related to the residential uses. The last sort of set of things that this ordinance does is it changes the administrative variance section to rename it reasonable accommodation. And the approval criteria for administrative variances for reasonable accommodation is revised to more closely reflect the Fair Housing Act. And the reference to the Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals being the avenue of appeals is deleted because it's the Urban Design Commission. Now, the department is recommending approval for this ordinance, subject to 2 changes. The first change is to delete the severe alcohol-dependent housing use type from the exhibit. That's already been repealed and doesn't exist. It was just an error to include that. And the second thing was the second recommendation is to add in the the table of commercial uses and the Eagle River table of commercial uses. Eagle River residential table and the table of commercial uses. So 3 tables were mistakenly left out, essentially, when it comes to the use-specific standards. Only the Anchorage Bowl table was referenced. So that's just an oversight. Let's see. I would like to say just a couple more things. First of all, Pamela Weiss from the Law Department, the Legal Department, is here with me to help answer questions to the Commission. The purpose of this ordinance, we should be mindful, is to remove barriers to the types of housing which would which are prohibited by the Fair Housing Act for discrimination. So just keep that in mind. The ordinance is on pages 5 through 18 of your packet. And the Clarion report, which is the basis of the ordinance, that begins on page 34. The summary of the key recommendations of the report on page 38. A note about Clarion, the consultant. On page 37 of your packets at the top, they describe that they're a consultant who regularly reviews and recommends amendments to local zoning, subdivision, and land use codes in order to bring them into compliance with federal legislation related to fair housing, persons with disabilities, telecommunications, manufactured housing, and First Amendment protections for free speech and free exercise of religion. The consultant has completed zoning and land use regulatory reviews to identify barriers to fair housing in the states of Idaho, Texas, Oregon, and Nevada, as well as the cities of Boise, Idaho, Indianapolis, Indiana, and numerous others. So just a note about who Clarion is. That's basically what I wanted to say. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. We've got a couple commissioners in the queue. Mr. Spinelli, then Mr. Spring.
Through the chair, assuming somebody were designing an assisted living home right now, when would this take effect? I guess I'm trying to get a feel for plans. I guess I should first let me disclose I'm designing a 24-room assisted living home. And then I guess, but my question is for maybe anybody else. When would this take effect for buildings under design currently?
It would take effect on February 23rd. So you would have to work with, if you already had your building plans approved prior to that date, if the municipality tried to remove that vested right, you would claim estoppel. And
yeah, okay.
Mr. Spring.
Yeah, I have to admit, I had trouble trying to digest this ordinance. It's very complex, and my problem is that we're under HUD direction to approve an ordinance that a consultant has come up with. And I guess my understanding is that we have to adopt the recommended. ones, the ones that they say there's no option, basically. It's not listed as an option. But we can take their optional ones and either recommend that, or either adopt them or not adopt them. I have like questions about 3 different questions. I have questions regarding sections in the Clarion report that appear to be required recommendations, and I can't link them up with the ordinance, so I don't know if it's been incorporated in the ordinance or not. And then there's optional ones that are in the ordinance, and I don't have any discussion about why they were incorporated. And then there's other optional ones that weren't adopted. And there's, quite a few. There's scattered all over the place. I don't know why they weren't adopted. Why weren't they included? It seems like we're under court order, basically, or HUD orders to change our ordinance, but I can't tell you whether or not, this is meeting their requirements or not, because there's no link between the ordinance and all these different requirements and options. Very difficult as commissioner to figure it out.
And I think that question's for staff. I can just shed light on one of those issues, the residential design standards. When I met with Erica maybe a year ago, she goes, "Oh, I go, how come there's no design standards for assisted living, or where am I missing it?" And she said, "We missed it. That was an error in code, and I noticed that they've proposed to fix that." So I doubt that had anything to do with HUD. It was like a code cleanup, but that's my one answer.
Well, if I can follow up, we have to make a recommendation, right? And the recommendation assumes that we understand that all the requirements were met in the ordinance. So how do I know that? And how can I say recommend it if I don't know that?
Mr. McLaughlin, maybe you could shed some light on, if we have to go page by page, where we differ in code that you're proposing versus what HUD is actually requiring. So what's above or below HUD's requirements? If you could point those out to us. I think would that help, Mr. Spring?
I'll say thank you through the chair, Mr. Spring. I'll say 2 things in response. I wasn't the drafter of this ordinance, but in my study of the ordinance and the Clarion report, I find only 2 places where so the ordinance was drafted to implement the recommendations, and it takes all of the recommended changes and effectuates them in this ordinance. The optional recommendations, there were a couple of those that weren't followed exactly, and they're on page 75, and I can speak to those. I also wanted to say that I guess, because I don't want to get on the record, because I'm not an attorney myself, either Mr. Spring's characterization of the Clarion report, whether it's correct or not. I'll just say that on page 27 of the packet, the conciliation agreement says that Anchorage Municipal Code, in substantial accordance with the consultant's recommendations, to the extent necessary to achieve compliance with the Fair Housing Act. So that seems to track with what the way that Mr. Spring described it for a layperson. On page, let's see, what page did I cite there? Yeah, page 75. So all the recommended changes were taken in this ordinance. On page 75, there are 2 optional changes that weren't followed. 2 optional changes that weren't quite done. So 1, 2, 3, 4. The fourth bullet from the top under habilitative care, the fourth bullet from the top on page 75 says optional, revise the same table to make medium habilitative care facilities a permitted use in the R2M and R3 zoning districts. So it was already a conditional use in the R3 medium habilitative care facility. So they made it, they changed it from a conditional use to a permitted use, the way that this recommended. But in the R2M, we didn't take their recommendation to make it a permitted use. We made it a conditional use, not as pervasive as this optional recommendation. And the reason why was because, medium and large habilitative care facilities in the R2M district, which is a district that limits buildings to 8 units in a structure. But I think they're more often in Anchorage developed with duplexes or maybe up to 4plexes. It didn't seem wise to add a habilitative care facility as a permitted use because of the intensity of the use that might be greater than 8 dwelling units. Now, with respect to the second change that we didn't completely accept was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 bullet points from the top, and it begins with optional and says revise table 21 to make small habilitative care facilities a permitted use in the R8, R9, and R10 districts. So the report is recommending is an optional recommendation, saying, well, let's add small habilitative care facilities to these rural, large lot zoning districts. And we did not do that. It didn't seem wise to introduce these habilitative care facilities to remote large lot districts that are far from services and could be difficult or impossible for emergency services to access them. The Clarion report allows us to not include this optional recommendation because they say it's not a violation of the Fair Housing Act, because by not including them, it doesn't make them unavailable because they're available in other zoning districts. So those are the 2 places where the report doesn't do, or the ordinance doesn't do what the report wants or is recommending. I hope that answers your question.
And if I may, my name is Pamela Weiss. I'm one of the assistant municipal attorneys, and I've been working on this issue for a very long time with HUD. And I'm definitely happy to speak to sort of the what brought us to the point that we're at. We used Clarion because they helped just draft the current Title 21. They were the most familiar. I would say that the conciliation agreement is definitely a compromise. In my experience, the types of recommendations that HUD would have for us would probably expand things. If they were to just tell us what to do, they might tell us to actually expand it broader. Clarion has taken what I think is a very measured approach at looking at how we can reasonably make housing for disabled persons equally available or reasonably available without prohibiting it in locations where other residential uses are permitted, but also not requiring us to make it available in every single district. So I guess in summary, just to realize that some of what we have here is definitely a compromise. And one of the difficulties is that it's a very popular topic. And HUD has definitely sought to ensure that the requirements of the Fair Housing Act are met in every jurisdiction. So they have been very aggressive about it, and they were very determined to make sure that we did something. And they're allowing us to use a consultant that we felt would give us a very fair shot at coming up with a reasonable way to amend the code. Was a compromise on their part as well. So, I guess I just want to make sure that you realize I'm available to answer any questions about the history and where we're at. While I do think in general that the consultant's recommendations do need to be adhered to, it's also critical to know that if somebody sees something that they think should be changed, that there is that flexibility to make a change to the code. When I negotiated the agreement with HUD, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't that they have to adopt it 100%. It needs to be substantially similar. It needs to be in conformance with it, but there can be some minor deviations. And that's it, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and otherwise I'll just remain silent and allow
Could you spell your last name for the record?
Oh, Weiss, W-E-I-S-S.
Thank you.
And otherwise I'll allow Francis to walk through any of the specific things if anybody else needs some pointing to where they are at in the ordinance.
Mr. Spring and then Mr. Walker.
Yes, there's one option, maybe help clarify. It's on page 75 of the staff report. It's down under assisted living facilities, the second bullet. And just to maybe help me figure out where it is, since staff said it was adopted, everything was adopted except those few things. It says revise section 2105.030B1 to clarify that small assisted living facilities may occupy only those types of housing units, living structures permitted by right in the zone district where the use is located. So I'm looking at the ordinance 2105.030B1, and I don't, maybe I'm missing it. I don't see that in that section.
Mr. Spring, you're saying the third bullet point from the bottom on page 75?
The second one from the bottom.
Second one. Okay, I was looking at the wrong one. Okay. Revised section. Clarify that small systems may occupy only those types of housing structures permitted by right. Oh, yeah. No, that is covered. Let me point to that. Yeah. On page 10 of your packet, thank you, Pam. On page 10 of your packet in the middle, BI, I says an assisted living facility may only occupy a type of household living structure that is permitted in the zoning district.
Okay. And then the next one down there, which is also in the same section, to add a requirement that new construction and additions to existing primary structures comply with the same residential design standards in section 2107.110. Okay, I see that. Yeah, is that 2 there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Sure, Mr. Spinelli, go ahead.
On that section that we were just looking at, the last bullet point on page 75, did that actually go into the amended code? The requirement that any addition to an assisted living facility be brought up to current design standards? That's, I guess, my interpretation of what that says.
Can you clarify your question, Mr. Spinelli?
This last bullet point on page 75, an optional revised section 2105.030.b.1, use specific standards for small assisted living facilities, to add requirement that new construction and additions to existing primary structures comply with the same residential design standards in section 21.07.110 and the same use-specific standards regarding the side setbacks for accessory structures. But I guess my main question is, the way I read that is there's a lot of assisted living facilities in existing homes, and if they wanted to do any remodel or addition to one of those homes, then they would be meant to comply with the design standards of the new Title 21. That's what the first half of that bullet says to me, and I was curious if that went in the code or not.
Well, I'll take that because I think this is an issue of construction, statutory construction, and if you look at the proposal to the use-specific standards, what it says is all construction. So any of the work that is done, whether that be an addition or whether that be a whole new facility, would be subject to the requirement of the standards in the residential design standards. So I think effectively what's drafted here does incorporate that. It just doesn't use the exact same language that was proposed. But I don't know that it necessarily means that obviously, the restroom all the way on the other side of the house that isn't being touched. I don't think that this section is saying that that would necessarily have to comply.
Well, you must not go through many municipal zoning reviews.
I don't, but.
And so that, I guess, that worries me a little bit. One of the big things with Title 21 and the residential design standard was that it wasn't going to apply retroactively to all the buildings in town because it could be pretty problematic for a lot of structures to try to meet the current design standards. And I mean, I'm designing a building that now has design standards if this passes, and I'm like okay with that. I think that, but to actually go back to, because every single assisted living facility that they make in an existing home, and I guess the reason I know this is because I get a lot of sprinkler guys who call me up asking if I have the plans for houses because they're adding sprinklers to houses that I had built to become assisted living. So it would almost make that every single one of those would have to comply with the design standards. And the only problem with the design standards is that it kind of outlaws garages in certain instances. So.
A couple points to respond to Mr. Spinelli's comments. So the sprinkler bit, that has to do with this policy, a policy on the building department's website that says when you're taking a single-family house and converting it into an assisted living facility or residential care facility, you're required to get a change of use permit if you're putting in a certain number of people. There's a size criteria. After a certain number of residents for an assisted living facility or habilitative care facility, then you must make certain upgrades to the structure. And it's not for all, but over a certain number of residents, then that triggers the need to make fire access upgrades, that sort of thing. But what Ms. Weiss said is correct, and Title 21 is consistent about that, and the planning department's consistently applied that when, this is how Chapter 12 works for Title 21 as well, the nonconforming rights section. You don't have to upgrade the entire structure, just those parts that are being remodeled. So that is to say that for those, I think Mr. Spinelli was trying to make the point that we have all these existing facilities around town. Now, if they come in for a building permit, are they going to be required to, change the facade of the building to comply with residential design standards, the residential design standards in that subsection 110? And no, they would not be. They would be required to. We would consider whether or not upgrades to. So, if a building addition was added to the building, then the part of the building that is brand new would have to address the residential design standards. Internal remodels don't have anything to do with this. We're just talking about exterior. So I believe that Mr. Spinelli's concerns are covered the way that he would like.
Frank.
Here's an example, another one where it looks like it's required, but I don't see it again. And this is on page 76. It's the second bullet. It says, replace the text of section 2105030B1C with a provision requiring that large assisted living facilities meet the same zoning requirements applicable to the type of structure being constructed or occupied. So we replace the text of a section under the large assisted living facilities. So I look at the ordinance and I see assisted living, and I see B, which is small, and then I see C, which looks like it's deleted, but I don't see a replacement there where it seems to be asked for in the clearing report.
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, that bullet point is saying that large assisted living facilities must comply with the requirements of the, let's see, replace the text and provision, meet the same zoning requirements applicable to the type of structure being constructed. So that's the same section that we read before. So if you go to page 10 of your packet, it says, you know, B is group living, B1 is assisted living facility, and then it defines it. And then BI, it says an assisted living facility may only occupy a type of housing, household living structure that is permitted in the zoning district. That that does that, yeah. But so many of the it's difficult, but many of these, if you try and trace it by the way that they've we've achieved everything that they've recommended, but not necessarily with. We found more efficient ways to make the change. So it may not be in the place that they've cited, but instead, you know, we consolidated it into one paragraph.
Okay, just one other one, just to make ease my mind here. On page 77, dimensional development and design standards, assisted living facilities, habilitative care. Under those two, I'm not sure where those fall either. It talks about amend the zoning ordinance to clarify that, notwithstanding other provisions of the chapter, blah, 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 in those zoning districts where assisted living facilities are permitted, the development and design standards and plan submittal requirements applicable to for use are the same in development and design standards applicable to the type of structure being constructed or occupied. Yeah. I don't want to read the whole thing, but I don't see where that's covered either.
If I may, one of the difficulties, and I think you're experiencing it, Mr. Spring, is that when the consultant reviewed the code, they reviewed the code as it was written. And in the code, we divided our use-specific standards for the small facilities and the large. We had two separate. And what we've done is we've managed to combine them and make them more broad. So, but essentially, those are all under that B1B, and then you have the little Roman numeral 1. We've looked at the little 2 I's, and then we have the little 3 I's. So on page 10, where it says assisted living facilities shall comply with dimensional standards and table 21.06-1 of the applicable residential structure type. And one of the things you're going to find when you look at the report is you'll probably see the same recommendation made in 2 separate places, one for the small, one for the large. But as Francis mentioned, we were able to be much more efficient by simply only having one use-specific standards for all assisted living.
Okay, thank you.
Does that help, Mr. Spring? We've got one more question here in the queue, Mr. Spinelli. Go ahead.
On page 14, Exhibit A, the use table. Sorry, I was looking at habilitative care and I meant to be looking at assisted living.
Any other questions for staff? If not, we'll open up for public testimony. Anyone here to testify in case 2016-0014? Welcome. Please state your name and spell it slowly for us.
Thank you. I'm Nancy Pease, P-E-A-S-E. I'm a Rabbit Creek Community Council board member, here to present our council's position, so I may need most of the 5 minutes. First, our council supports first, you should have on the table somewhere a letter from our council which was approved by our board and delivered electronically. First, our council supports the underlying intent of this amendment, which is to enable assisted living and habilitative care to be located in more zoning districts. Second, I want to reiterate our understanding that you, the Planning and Zoning Commission, do have latitude to make amendments to this ordinance. And specifically, when you were looking at page 75, I think it's worth noting that you do have the latitude to choose permitted or conditional use status in several zoning districts. That's on page 75. And third, to be very to the point, because I know you hate to tinker with something that's been through legal reviews, on page 14 of your packet, I'll show you specifically what we're looking for. And that is, if you find the residential R3 column and go down until you see the 2C conditional uses that are proposed to be deleted, we're asking to keep those. And then if you shift over to the commercial columns and you look at the B1A, we'd like that second P for the larger assisted living facilities to be changed to a C. So we're asking for 3 Cs. Okay, here's why. The designating of the medium and large occupancy care facilities as a permitted use in the R3 and the B1A is not logical or compatible in our council area. Specifically, in terms of bedroom space, you can retrofit some of the large houses to the medium and large occupancy facilities, but you can't contain the impacts of operating those homes onto the sites. A building permit officer would not have the public input from the neighborhood to understand the impacts, and he wouldn't, or she wouldn't have the jurisdiction to resolve them unless there's a conditional use process. This concern doesn't derive from the purpose of the facilities, but from their scale, and also from the unique conditions that we have in our R3 and B1 areas. And specifically, one of our R3 areas is Potter Creek subdivision. It was built in the 1980s with deliberately narrow roads that have no shoulders and no on-street parking. Any vehicle that idles in the roadway reduces traffic to 1 lane. And in addition, Potter Valley Road is essentially about a 2.5-mile-long cul-de-sac. So picture our nightmare scenario of a wildfire coming around from McHugh Creek picnic fires. And you've got a few fire trucks in there trying to fight the fires, and you have cars trying to creep out these substandard roads. That is not the place where you want to be evacuating people from a large occupancy facility. Secondly, water is another concern in our existing R3 Potter Creek subdivision. A facility with 10 or more occupants would appear to require considerably higher water demand than a typical residence. This is on a community well. They're already stretched for water in that subdivision. Another area of particular concern is our 1 B1A site, which is down on the old Seward Highway. It's currently Chuck's Backhoe, and it's been for sale for a long time. There, we would assume a new facility would be designed and built. The pavement there is crumbling right through the white line of the shoulders. The roads are extremely inadequate. Very dangerous intersection, too. Also, there's no public water to that site, so presumably there would need to be a well. And all around it are R6 homes on well and septic. We've already had that same battle with the Rabbit Creek Community Church a little way up the road. They're on a well and septic. They wanted to expand, and they've had drawdown tests that have drained the wells around them. So finally, the pattern, which is acknowledged in here on page 76, of sort of round-the-clock activity, use, the shift changes and so forth, it's out of character with the residential neighborhoods. And neighbors should have a chance to weigh in on buffering, screening, or lighting designs to reduce the impacts of institutional use patterns. So in closing, Rabbit Creek Community Council is requesting a specific change to ensure that a conditional use process rather than a permitted process will address neighborhood impacts and allow neighborhood input in those 3 zones, 2 zones, R3 and the B1A. And with all due respect to the Clarion Committee, local input is really important in neighborhoods with unique or unusual conditions such as ours. So thank you very much. And again, just to reiterate, I think you do have, the way we read it, the latitude to make some changes. And I don't know what your timeline is, but you may be able to get further reassurance from the attorney whether our requested changes would still be in line with the legal requirements. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pease. We've got a couple questions. Mr. Spring?
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I completely forgot about the R3 SLs that are all over the place. some are in areas without sewer and water, and some are in areas, and generally the SL is limited to like 3 dwelling units per acre. And it seems like making that a conditional use would meet the legal requirements, because you aren't. I'm not sure. Well, I'll have to ask the attorney that. That's something she'd have to ask. But I appreciate the problem there, though, for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. Mr. Spinelli?
Yeah, my question, you requested that we kind of restrict the R3s all over town. I would say the R3 in your community council's district is almost something that makes me scratch my head about. It doesn't seem like an R3 to me. But the R3s around the rest of the town would then be restricted by us, making this a conditional use permit. Does that seem like it might be unfair or restricting assisted living homes in the R3 areas, especially R3s throughout town that are more commonly R3, that are close to transit and parks? And
I can't speak for the pattern of R3 across town. We do have another large R3 subdivision, which is Golden View Park, I think it's called. It's the one with the covered bridge, and that's developed at a density of about 2 units per acre, and they're all single-family homes. So with regard to our specific experience, they're definitely low-density single-family home neighborhoods, and a conditional use permit process would be really desirable.
Yeah, I guess I'm just saying that the 2 units per acre isn't really what the R3 was intended to do, but I would say Golden View Park is a R1A or R1 maybe in my mind. But I guess what I'm worried about is making a conditional use on the R3 zoning, say in Midtown, where there might be a by right assisted living building going in, and if we adopt your recommended changes, it would now be a conditional use. And that would add a significant hurdle to the development of that building.
Well, the R3 zone is a kind of a very diverse category, which can be developed with single-family homes all the way up to fairly dense multifamily homes. So maybe the language could be tweaked so that R3 single-family subdivisions had a conditional use permit, whereas R3 multifamily at some density didn't. I don't know how you would do that, but that would be one way to do it.
One more question, please. Have you, the municipalities going through their land use map, has the Rabbit Creek Community Council looked at maybe talking to the municipality about some of the R3 up on the hillside with no utilities that might not necessarily be appropriately zoned in R3?
That's an interesting idea. No, we haven't talked to them. We've been told that there really weren't any changes in our council area, so they wouldn't be bringing their show to our community council. But that's an interesting idea.
Thank you. One more question from Commissioner Walker.
I just wanted to make sure that I accurately reflected in my notes which changes you were asking us to make to the table. So in the R3 column, you want us to change all of the P's to C's, basically?
No, just the 2 P's. There are 2 C's under current code, and they're proposed to be changed to P, and we wanted to keep them as C's. So there would be a conditional use for habilitative care medium and for habilitated care large. Those are C's now, and we'd like to keep them that way.
And in B1A?
The B1A, right now there are no provisions, but there's, we'd like to change that second P, which is assisted living facility 9 or more residents, to make that a C. And again, our B1 is probably somewhat unusual in that it's surrounded by water wells.
Thanks for the clarification.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Pease. Anyone else here to testify in the matter before the board? Mr. McLaughlin, you're in the queue to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The department doesn't support the recommendations of the Rabbit Creek Community Council. We don't believe that the issues that were raised are issues at all. I'll make several points. The first is that to, to put potential barriers to the development of these facilities because they exist in limited areas on the hillside, but to apply that to the whole municipality is problematic, right? Because we're just talking about the Hillside District Plan. I have so for instance, to, limit medium or large habilitative care facilities or assisted living facilities in the B1A here, when there's only 3 properties within the entire Hillside District Plan that are zoned that, but then to apply that all across the city when we have very few B1A properties to start with. 3 of them happen to be in the Hillside District Plan, but there are very limited areas throughout the city. But they allow hardware stores and all kinds of commercial activity. And to think that a residential use, it wouldn't be as intense a use as the commercial uses that are already permitted uses in that district. I have the zoning map for the Hillside District Plan in front of me, and in regards to the R3 district, there are R3 properties in several places within the Hillside District planning area. Yes, it's surprising and all of that. Every one of them is R3SL. So all of them have special limitations. And I think that, usually special limitations are written to list the activities that you can do and the ones that are prohibited. If the special limitations for these ordinances list the permitted activities and it doesn't list assisted living facility or habilitative care facility already, which it wouldn't, because it wouldn't be more permissive than what the existing code already is, then it would continue to be prohibited in those districts. So I don't think that there's an issue. Every one of these R3SL districts probably can't have this. R3SL districts probably can't have these types of activities anyway because of the special limitations. And this ordinance we're proposing doesn't change that. Also, there was a comment that Ms. Pease made about concerns about insufficient public utilities or roads and constraints on water wells, that sort of thing. And those are valid points. And before this meeting, I spoke with the traffic department, with the private development department, and with on-site water and wastewater services. And I asked them that with a building permit or a change of use permit to remodel an existing single-family home or another building in order to build one of these facilities, would that trigger potentially off-site improvements or other improvements? And they all said yes. So some examples are private development could require you to pave the road to the property. Fire department could require fire access and minimum fire road standards. On-site water and wastewater services could prohibit the development altogether or require upgrades to the well and septic serving the property. That would be Title 15 would be essential for any development that increased residential, the number of people, because they size all of these things based on how many people are, how many bedrooms exist or how many people are in a structure. So one last point, the residential design standards that are in Chapter 7 of the new code, although they weren't meant specifically to address institutional uses, the whole idea of these regulations is that we can't treat assisted living facilities and habilitative care facilities differently than other residential facilities in the same type of structure. To do that would be discriminatory. So the department stands behind the ordinance as it is written and opposes any changes that were proposed here.
And if I may, Your Chair, I just want to clarify, obviously from a legal perspective, we would have to look at the special limitations and ensure that none of those violate the Fair Housing Act. But fundamentally, if they are not treated any differently, in other words, if a same size residential use for non-disabled people is not allowed, then that same size use for disabled people could be prohibited with a special limitation. I was also wanting to talk about some of the other things that we believe that this ordinance balances some of the concerns that neighborhoods would have about residential quality and character, and I think that we attempted to do that with the blessing of the consultant by requiring that if a residence is going to, if somebody's going to put a facility in a neighborhood, they're going to have to use the size, the dimensions, and the appearance of the structure is going to have to match the neighborhood quality. And then touching, kind of drawing upon some of the additional things that Francis talked about, is to know that nothing in our ordinance changes the licensing and other requirements of other statutes and ordinances. For instance, these facilities would still remain limited to the number of people based on, frankly, the number of bedrooms. That is going to be a limitation, and there's going to be many other requirements that they have to meet through state licensing, which I don't know all the details of those, but that will also ensure that you don't have a facility that is a disproportionate size that doesn't match the size of standard residential uses being used in that same neighborhood. So we think that this strikes the balance, but also meets the requirements of the Fair Housing Act, that disabled persons wanting to occupy a residential facility in a residential character who are disabled don't face any additional barriers that someone who's not disabled would face. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Spring.
Well, I think we're missing the point a little bit on the R3 requirements permitting medium and large rehabilitative care facilities in those districts. And I agree with Commissioner Spinelli that in an ordinary R3 that's fine, because what you're trying to do in the ordinance is clear, and you've done a good job, is try to match the assisted and habilitative with the density that's allowed or the number of people that's allowed in those zoning districts. And I know you've done that, but I don't think you quite understand what the R3SL districts are like. It's not, they don't prohibit generally uses in there, as a lot of SLs do. In most cases, and this doesn't only apply just to Hillside, it applies in large areas of Chugagee River, where the R3, for whatever reason, and it doesn't make sense to me either, because you should rezone it, you should zone it properly. They say 2-3 dwelling units per acre. They might say 3 dwelling units per acre, 4 dwelling units per acre. That's the SL. So if the object is to match the habilitative and assisted living facilities with the densities that are in the zoning district, you've got a problem, because you got 26 residents and you're allowing in a R3 district with an SL that only allows 3 dwelling units per acre. That's way out of line with the existing density.
Well, I would say that I think that we attempted to draft the ordinance in a manner that would not, assisted living facilities, habilitative care facilities would not have additional barriers that residential, but they don't necessarily get a free pass either. In other words, if there are requirements that apply to all residential dwellings in that district, then they would have to abide by that too.
And through the chair, yes, that seems like it'd be a lot harder to implement than it sounds, because what is an appropriate dwelling? There's some big houses on the hillside, I think. I don't live in one, but there's some big ones, and they might have 10, 12 rooms. So my question is, could you, which wouldn't be out of character with some of the areas, could you make that into a habilitative medium density and put in 9 to 25 people in there and still meet the occupancy requirements of the house?
Perhaps, but again, there's so many different layers. We'd have to obviously look at what the zoning of the particular district is, but in addition, the licensing comes into play, and the number of square footage. They have square footage requirements per resident and per room, and as well as many other requirements. So it may be that if you had a 6-bedroom home if residential uses are permitted in that neighborhood and the home is of the right character, that it would be allowed under our zoning code. That doesn't necessarily mean that it would happen in that size because of the other regulations that apply, but that the zoning would, at least on its face, allow it just as it would allow a family to live there. And
I guess
that's the FHA.
I guess I don't see a way out of the problem, and it's a difficult one. I'd like to think about it more, I guess. But
Anything further, Mr. Spring? Commissioner Spinelli.
Just one thing to kind of set maybe you and everyone at ease is I am working with a lady who operates like 5 different houses and she's trying to condense into one facility. But from my discussions with her, I kind of can walk away with the feeling that having an assisted living home next to you would be better by far than having a house with 3 teenagers. And that's all I have.
Commissioner Walker.
I'll just speak to this concern real quick. I'm not as concerned, especially in this district, and especially with regard to the examples that we were given. I think in addition to any SLs that exist, there are probably, I think in all 3 of those instances, the Potter Valley, Golden View Park, and the other example, which I think is the subdivision adjacent to Golden View Park, they all have pretty consistent CC&Rs in place, and the Stepford wives in those communities I don't mean your garbage can is the same color as your neighbors, and I don't think they let you step too far outside those bounds. So I think there are other safeguards in place there.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Any other questions? Staff? Hearing and seeing none. Anybody else here did we close public testimony? I forgot. Slipped my mind, sorry. Hearing and seeing no one else, public testimony is closed. This matter rests with the board. What is the will of the body?
In the matter of case 2016-0014, I move to approve the ordinance as written by staff without any modifications.
A second from Mr. Spinelli. Mr. Walker, do you care to speak to your motion?
Just that, I think given the extent of the Clarion report and the fact that the legal department is involved here, and I think that, the planning staff has clearly devoted a lot of resources to it, I feel like this is a pretty thorough solution to this problem, and we did hear some valid concerns here tonight. But I feel like there are good and appropriate safeguards to prevent, unwanted consequences, i.e. these things cropping up in the wrong places on the hillside. And so I'm comfortable moving forward, and I think this is in public interest.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey.
Along with believing that there's proper safeguards and that the report was very well done, I think that it's fairly clear that this is an area in which there isn't a lot of housing, and it's a place where there is a growing need for it. I also feel that while sometimes it's scary to have something that's completely permitted, sometimes what can happen is if too many things get labeled as conditional uses, it's just another way to allow the discrimination to take place, which is what this whole process is trying to get rid of. And so I think that what has been proposed has been a really good balance of correcting something that's been a problem for a long time while also being very respectful to the character and of the residential neighborhoods that these will impact.
Thank you. Seeing no one else in the queue, please use your machines to vote. Ms. Bailey votes yea, as do the rest of the commissioners. That motion passes. Thank you for the public testimony. One more thing I forgot to do is to approve the minutes on our agenda, B1 from Monday, December 7th. So I would make a motion to approve those. It's been moved by Mr. Spinelli, seconded by Mr. Walker. Any discussion? Hearing none, those minutes pass. I believe that's all we have. Any other commissioner comments? Hearing and seeing none, all. No, we pulled those and voted on those earlier. Hearing nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Walker moves to adjourn.